When my husband of 35 years told me he'd always love me no matter what, I believed him with my whole heart. 2 weeks later, he was dead in our bed from a heart attack. Days later, I was standing in the doorway of our penthouse, watching his mistress rearrange my furniture. That's when I realized love is just a sandcastle waiting for the tide to come in. If you're watching this right now, make sure you subscribe and leave a comment telling me if you've ever had the rug pulled out from under your life. Trust me, you'll want to see how this story unfolds. My name is Eleanor Winters. At least, that's what I've been called for the last 35 years since I married Richard. Before that, I was just Eleanor Davis, a simple girl from Tennessee who'd come to the big city with dreams bigger than her wallet. I met Richard at a charity gala where I was serving drinks, and he was donating more money than I'd ever seen in my life. He smiled at me, and my world changed forever. Or so I thought. The morning I found Richard was the worst day of my life, until it wasn't. I woke up to the stillness. That's what I remember most. Richard was always an early riser, always making noise, the coffee grinder, the shower running, his deep voice on business calls even at 6 a.m. But that day, there was nothing. Just silence and the faint smell of his cologne that seemed to hang in the air like a ghost. I rolled over and saw him. Peaceful, like he was sleeping. But I knew. I just knew. My hand trembled as I reached for his wrist, searching for a pulse that wasn't there. His skin was cool to the touch. I screamed then, a sound I didn't recognize as my own. It echoed through our penthouse, bouncing off the marble floors and high ceilings that suddenly felt like a mausoleum. The paramedics came, solemn-faced and efficient. They confirmed what I already knew. A massive heart attack, they said. Quick. Painless. As if that was supposed to comfort me. Richard Winter, 63 years old, was gone. Just like that. The next few days passed in a blur of tears and phone calls. I arranged a funeral that Richard would have approved of, elegant but not ostentatious. He always said he wanted to be remembered for his life, not how much money was spent on burying him. Friends came, business associates, people I'd known for decades, and some I'd never met. They all had stories about Richard, about his generosity, his sharp mind, his loyalty. Loyalty. The word makes me laugh now. 3 days after the funeral, she arrived. I was sitting in Richard's study, trying to make sense of the papers his lawyer had sent over, when I heard the elevator chime. We lived on the top floor of the Archer building, a penthouse that took up the entire floor. No one could come up without the doorman calling first. But there had been no call. The elevator door slid open, and there she stood. Tall, blonde, and at least 20 years younger than me. She wore a black dress that clung to her body like it was painted on, red-soled shoes that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and a look of contempt that hit me like a physical blow. "You must be Eleanor," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness.
"I am Vivian."
Vivian Lane. I believe Richard mentioned me. He hadn't. Not once in 35 years had my husband mentioned a Vivian Lane. But looking at her standing there, something clicked into place. The late meetings. The weekend conferences. The mysterious calls he'd take in another room. "I don't believe he did," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. She smiled, a predatory curve of perfectly painted lips. "That's a shame. We've been together for 7 years. 7 years. My mind reeled. 7 years of lies. 7 years of betrayal while I kept his house, supported his career, loved him unconditionally. "I think you should leave," I said, standing up. At 60, I wasn't as slim as I once was. My hair, once a rich brown, was now streaked with silver. But I still had my dignity. Or so I thought. Vivian laughed, the sound like broken glass. "Oh, Eleanor, I'm not leaving." In fact, she set her designer purse down on my marble counter. "You're the one who needs to pack your bags. The penthouse is mine now." I stared at her, certain I'd misheard. "This is my home. Richard and I bought this place 30 years ago." "And Richard promised it to me 2 years ago," she countered, pulling a document from her purse. "See for yourself." With trembling hands, I took the paper. It was a deed transfer, signed by Richard, dated just 3 months ago. It granted ownership of the penthouse to Vivian Lane upon his death. "This can't be legal," I whispered, my eyes burning with unshed tears. "Oh, it's very legal." Richard had his lawyer draw it up. The same one who's handling his will. Her smile widened. "You didn't think he'd leave everything to you, did you? After all, you were just the trophy wife who got old." Her words cut deep, but I refused to let her see me cry. "Richard wouldn't do this to me. Wouldn't he? He did plenty of other things to you, like me, for instance." She laughed again. "You have 24 hours to get out. After that, I'm changing the locks." With that, she turned and walked back to the elevator, her heels clicking on the marble like a countdown to my exile. I spent that night in a daze, calling Richard's lawyer, Franklin Morris. He'd been our family attorney for decades. Surely, he would tell me this was all a mistake, a cruel joke played by a delusional woman. But Franklin's voice was grave when he finally called me back. "Eleanor, I'm afraid there have been some changes to Richard's estate plan in recent months." "What kind of changes?" I demanded, panic rising in my throat. "I can't discuss the details until the official reading of the will, which is scheduled for 8 weeks from now." 8 weeks? "But Franklin, there's a woman claiming Richard gave her a home. She's threatening to lock me out tomorrow." His silence told me everything I needed to know. "Franklin, please," I begged. "We've known each other for 30 years. Just tell me if it's true." He sighed heavily. "The penthouse was transferred to a Vivian Lane 3 months ago. I advised Richard against it, but he was insistent." The floor seemed to shift beneath me. "And the rest? Our savings? The company?" "Eleanor, I can't. Just tell me if I have anything left." Another painful silence. "The will reading is in 8 weeks. I'll see you then." I hung up, my hand shaking so badly I dropped the phone. It clattered to the floor, the screen cracking, a perfect metaphor for my life. I packed what I could that night: clothes, a few photos, my jewelry. The pieces Richard had given me over the years suddenly felt like costume trinkets, fake as his promises. I took them anyway. I'd need to sell them. As dawn broke, I took one last look at the penthouse I'd called home for 3 decades. The sweeping views of the city, the elegant furnishings I'd so carefully chosen, the life I'd built. All gone. Vivian arrived at precisely 9 a.m., a moving crew, and a locksmith in tow. She didn't even look at me as I wheeled my suitcases to the elevator. I was already a ghost to her. "Enjoy your victory," I said softly as the elevator doors began to close. "It won't last." Her laughter followed me down 60 floors to the lobby. The doorman, Jorge, who had known me for 20 years, couldn't meet my eyes. "Mrs. Winters, can I call you a cab?" "Thank you, Jorge," I said, trying to maintain what dignity I had left. "And it's Ms. Davis now." Apparently. I checked into a hotel that first night, a modest place, nothing like the 5-star establishments Richard and I had frequented. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floral bedspread, wondering how my life had imploded so completely in less than a week. The next morning, I went to the bank to access our joint accounts. The teller's sympathetic look told me everything before she even spoke. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Winters. The accounts have been frozen pending probate." "All of them?" I asked, my voice a whisper. She nodded, her eyes darting away from mine. "I'm afraid so. But how am I supposed to live? To eat? To pay for a place to stay?" She had no answer for that. 3 days later, the hotel manager knocked on my door. My credit card had been declined. I had until noon to vacate the room. I sold my first piece of jewelry that day, a diamond tennis bracelet Richard had given me for our 20th anniversary. The pawnshop owner barely looked at it before offering me a fraction of its worth. I took it anyway. The money from the bracelet lasted 2 weeks in a cheaper hotel. Then I sold my anniversary ring. Another week. My pearl earrings. 3 more days. By the time a month had passed since Richard's death, I had sold nearly every piece of jewelry I owned and was down to my last few $100s. The cheaper hotels were still too expensive to maintain. I had nowhere to go, That's how I ended up living in my car, a 10-year-old Mercedes that had been my birthday present from Richard back when such gifts were commonplace in our life. I parked in different lots each night, afraid of being noticed, of being asked to move along. I showered at a gym where I'd bought the cheapest membership available. I ate fast food and tried to make each meal last. All while Vivian Lane lived in my penthouse, slept in my bed, and spent my husband's money. Through it all, I maintained one connection to my old life, Margot Landry, my closest friend for 20 years. She'd offered me her guest room the moment she heard what happened, but I couldn't bear the pity, the whispers that would follow. Pride is a terrible companion when you're hungry, but it was all I had left. Still, Margot brought me food sometimes, met me for coffee, and most importantly, kept me informed about what was happening in the world I'd been exiled from. She's redecorating, Margot told me one afternoon, 6 weeks after Richard's death. We sat in her car in a parking lot, the air conditioning blasting against the summer heat, painting over that beautiful mural you commissioned in the dining room, replacing all the furniture. I nodded, numb to the pain now. What else? Margot hesitated, picking at the lid of her coffee cup. She's been hosting parties. Big ones. Telling everyone she was the love of Richard's life. And people believe her? Some do. Margot wouldn't meet my eyes. Eleanor, there's something else. My heart sank. What? She's been saying things. About you. That you knew about their affair all along. That you had an arrangement. White-hot anger flashed through me for the first time in weeks. That's a lie. I never knew. I know that, Margot said quickly. Anyone who really knows you knows that. But Eleanor, she's convincing. And she has evidence. What evidence? Margot pulled out her phone, scrolled through it, then handed it to me. On the screen was a social media post from Vivian. In the photo, she lounged on my sofa, wearing a man's dress shirt I recognized as Richard's, holding up a document. The caption read, "When your man makes it official. Sorry, Eleanor, but he always said you understood the arrangement. Hashtag second wife, hashtag true love." I zoomed in on the document. It wasn't clear enough to read, but it looked official, with a seal and signatures. What is that? I asked, my mouth dry. She's telling people it's a prenuptial amendment you signed years ago, acknowledging Richard's right to have companions. I thrust the phone back at Margot. That's a lie. I never signed anything like that. I believe you, Margot said softly. But Eleanor, she's winning the narrative. People are starting to look at you like... Like what? Like you're the pathetic old wife who couldn't keep her husband happy. And now you're just bitter because the younger woman got everything. I closed my eyes, fighting back tears. 2 more weeks until the will reading. Then we'll see who's pathetic. But as the days crawled by, my confidence wavered. What if Richard really had left me with nothing? What if this woman, this stranger who'd been sleeping with my husband for 7 years, really had won it all? The night before the will reading, I parked my car in the lot of a 24-hour supermarket. I reclined the seat as far as it would go, trying to find a comfortable position to sleep. After almost 2 months, I developed a routine. I had a small pillow, a blanket, a bag of essentials within reach. I was just drifting off when a sharp rap on the window jolted me awake. A security guard stood there, flashlight in hand. "Ma'am, you can't sleep here," he said when I rolled down the window. "Store policy. I'm just resting before I drive home." I lied. He shook his head. "I've seen you here 3 nights this week. You're living in your car." Shame burned through me. "Please. Just 1 more night. I have somewhere to go tomorrow." His face softened slightly. "I could lose my job, ma'am." I reached for my purse, pulled out $20, money I couldn't afford to spare. "Please." He looked at the money, then at me, and I saw the moment pity won out. "Just tonight. And park around back by the loading docks. No cameras there." I thanked him, started the car, and moved to where he'd suggested. As I settled in again, my phone buzzed with a text from Margot. "Thinking of you. No matter what happens tomorrow, you're not alone." I stared at the message, tears blurring my vision. Tomorrow. After 8 weeks of humiliation, of sleeping in my car while Vivian Lane paraded around in my life, tomorrow I would finally know the truth. I must have eventually fallen asleep because I woke to sunlight streaming through the car windows. I checked my watch. 8:30 a.m. The will reading was at 10. I drove to a gas station bathroom where I washed up as best I could. I'd saved one decent outfit for this day, a simple black dress and blazer. I applied makeup carefully, styled my hair, put on the one piece of jewelry I hadn't sold, a simple silver locket that had belonged to my mother. Looking in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. 2 months of living in my car had taken their toll. I'd lost weight, and dark circles shadowed my eyes despite my attempts to conceal them. But I held my head high. Today, finally, I would have answers. Franklin Morris's law office was in a sleek downtown building, all glass and steel. I arrived at 9:45, determined to be early, to look composed when Vivian arrived. The receptionist's eyes widened slightly when I gave my name. Mrs. Winters. We've been trying to reach you. My circumstances have been unsettled, I said carefully. Is Mr. Morris ready for me? Yes, he's expecting you. Conference room C, down the hall to your right. I walked slowly, my heart pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. When I reached the door marked C, I paused, took a deep breath, and pushed it open. Franklin sat at the head of a large table, papers spread before him. To his right sat a younger man I didn't recognize, probably another lawyer. And there, on the left side of the table, sat Vivian. She looked up when I entered, and for a split second, surprise flickered across her face. Perhaps she'd expected me to look more defeated. Or perhaps she hadn't expected me to show up at all. Eleanor, Franklin stood, coming around to pull out a chair for me, directly across from Vivian. Thank you for coming. As if I would miss it, I said, taking the seat with as much grace as I could muster. Vivian smirked. Love the outfit, Eleanor. Very practical. I met her gaze evenly. Thank you, Vivian. I find that in times of crisis, it's best to focus on substance rather than show. Her eyes narrowed, but before she could respond, the door opened again. A tall, distinguished man with salt and pepper hair entered, followed by a young woman clutching a tablet. Sorry I'm late, the man said, taking a seat beside me. Traffic was a nightmare. Franklin nodded. Now that we're all here, we can begin. He looked at me. Eleanor, this is James Wilson, Richard's business partner. I knew of James, of course, but we'd never met. Richard had kept his business life separate from our social one. Mrs. Winters, James said, nodding politely. And this, Franklin continued, gesturing to the young woman who'd taken a seat at the far end of the table, is Melissa Chun, our firm's newest associate. She'll be taking notes. Can we get on with it? Vivian asked, checking her watch. My watch, I realized with a jolt. It was the Cartier tank watch Richard had given me for our 30th anniversary. Of course, Franklin said, adjusting his glasses. We're here today for the reading of Richard Winters' last will and testament. Before I begin, I should note that this is the final version, executed 3 weeks before Mr. Winters' death. 3 weeks. I frowned. That meant it was created after the deed transferred to Vivian. Franklin cleared his throat and began to read. I, Richard James Winters, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, revoking all previous wills and codicils. Standard language. I'd heard it before when Richard's parents had passed. First, to my business partner, James Wilson, I leave my 20% stake in Winters Wilson Investments, with a stipulation that 5% of all future profits be donated to the Children's Hospital of Greater Metropolitan, in memory of my brother, Thomas. James nodded solemnly. No surprise there. Richard had always intended to leave his share of the business to James. Second, Franklin continued, to my loyal staff, housekeeper Maria Gonzalez, driver Peter Kim, and personal assistant Sarah Mitchell, I leave the sum of $100,000 each, in recognition of their years of faithful service. Again, expected. Richard had always been generous with the people who worked for us. Third, Franklin paused, glancing up briefly. To Vivian Lane? Beside me, I felt rather than saw Vivian straighten in her chair, a smug smile no doubt spreading across her face. I leave the sum of $1, and the knowledge that greed and deceit are their own punishment. The silence that followed was absolute. I turned slowly to look at Vivian. Her face had gone chalk white, her mouth hanging open in disbelief. That's impossible, she finally choked out. There must be some mistake. Richard promised me everything. Franklin continued, as if she hadn't spoken. The remainder of my estate, including all properties, financial accounts, investments, vehicles, and personal belongings, I leave to my wife, Eleanor Davis Winters, with all my love and deepest apologies for the pain I've caused her. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The words seemed to hover in the air, not quite reaching me. This is a trick, Vivian hissed, standing up so abruptly her chair tipped over backward. Richard signed the penthouse over to me. I have the deed. Yes, Franklin said, removing another document from his folder. Regarding the deed transfer for the property at 1800 Archer Avenue, Penthouse A, Mr. Winters included a specific codicil. He handed the document to me, but my hands were shaking too badly to hold it. In summary, Franklin explained, the deed transfer to Ms. Lane was conditional upon a morality clause. Specifically, that she not attempt to remove Mrs. Winters from the property, that she not publicly disparage Mrs. Winters, and that she not claim to be Mr. Winters' primary relationship. The deed transfer becomes null and void if any of these conditions are broken. Vivian's face contorted with rage. That's not what he told me. He said the penthouse was mine free and clear. Perhaps he did, Franklin said mildly. But this is what he signed. And according to the evidence Mr. Winters himself collected, he gestured to the younger lawyer, who slid a folder across the table. You have broken all 3 conditions. I opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were screenshots of Vivian's social media posts, boasting about evicting me. Photos of her wearing Richard's clothes, claiming to be his true love. Statements from witnesses, including Jorge, our doorman, testifying that she had changed the locks and refused me entry to my own home. Richard knew exactly who you were, Miss Lane, Franklin said, his voice cold. He may have been infatuated enough to stray, but he was not foolish enough to leave his life's work to someone who saw him as nothing more than a meal ticket. Vivian lunged across the table, reaching for the folder. You can't do this to me. I was with him for 7 years. 7 years while she got old and boring. James stood, placing himself between Vivian and me. That's enough, Miss Lane. But Vivian was beyond reason. She turned to me, her face twisted with hate. You knew, didn't you? You planned this with him. This whole thing was a setup. I found my voice at last. I didn't know about you until the day after his funeral, when you showed up at my door and threw me out of my home. Liar, she screamed. You must have known. No one is that blind. But I saw the doubt in her eyes. The dawning realization that perhaps Richard had played her as thoroughly as she thought she'd played him. Miss Lane, Franklin said firmly, I suggest you leave now. Security has been alerted. As if on cue, 2 men in suits appeared in the doorway. Vivian looked around wildly, like a cornered animal. This isn't over, she spat at me. Do you hear me? This isn't over. The security guards stepped forward, each taking one of her arms. She struggled briefly, then seemed to deflate, all the fight leaving her at once. As they led her away, I heard her final words, half sob, half threat. I gave him 7 years of my life. 7 years. He owes me. When the door closed behind them, silence fell over the room. I sat, stunned, trying to process what had just happened. Eleanor, Franklin said gently, there's more you should know. I looked up at him, dazed. More? He nodded, removing a sealed envelope from his briefcase. Richard left this for you. He asked that you read it privately. I took the envelope, Richard's familiar handwriting on the front. For Eleanor, open after the will reading. There are also practical matters to discuss, Franklin continued. The probate process, transferring the assets back into your name, regaining access to the penthouse. I nodded numbly. Yes, of course. And there's the matter of the investigation. That caught my attention. Investigation. Franklin and James exchanged a look. It was James who spoke. Eleanor, there are irregularities in the company accounts. Significant sums missing. Richard discovered them shortly before his death. He believed someone was embezzling. I frowned. And you think it was Vivian? We don't know, James said carefully. But Richard was conducting his own investigation. He seemed to think it went deeper than just Vivian. Franklin cleared his throat. The point is, Eleanor, while you've legally inherited everything, there may be complications. People who won't be happy about Richard's choices. A chill ran down my spine. You think I'm in danger? Neither man answered directly, which was answer enough. What should I do? I asked, clutching Richard's letter in my trembling hands. For now, we get you back into your home, Franklin said firmly. We have a court order ready to go. Today, if you wish. I nodded, a strange sense of unreality washing over me. 2 months of living in my car, of humiliation and fear, and just like that, it was over? Except it wasn't. Not really, because now there were new questions. Who had been stealing from Richard's company? Why had Richard let me suffer for 2 months after his death? And what secrets did his letter hold? As if reading my thoughts, Franklin said softly, Eleanor, Richard loved you. Whatever his failings, whatever mistakes he made, he loved you until the end. I wasn't so sure anymore, but I managed a weak smile. Thank you, Franklin. 3 hours later, I stood in the elevator of the Archer building, key in hand. Franklin had moved quickly, securing an emergency court order to remove Vivian from the premises. By the time I arrived, she was gone, escorted out by the same security guards who'd removed her from the law office. Jorge, the doorman, couldn't look me in the eye. Mrs. Winters, I'm so sorry. I wanted to help you, but Ms. Lane said she had legal documents. I touched his arm gently. It's all right, Jorge. You did what you could. You testified for me, and I'm grateful. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped out into the foyer of my penthouse. My home. It looked different. Vivian had indeed redecorated, replacing my classic, comfortable style with modern, angular furniture and cold, metallic accents. I walked through each room slowly, cataloging the changes, feeling like a stranger in my own space. In the master bedroom, her clothes still hung in the closet that had once held mine. Her perfume lingered in the air. It was as if she'd tried to erase every trace of me, to write herself into my life story. In Richard's study, I found his desk as meticulous as ever. It was the one room Vivian seemed to have left untouched. Perhaps, despite everything, she'd respected his private space. Or perhaps she simply hadn't found what she was looking for yet. I sat in his leather chair, the one he'd spent countless evenings in, working late into the night. I placed his letter on the desk before me, staring at my name in his handwriting. With a deep breath, I broke the seal and unfolded the thick pages. My dearest Eleanor, it began. If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've just discovered that I've left everything to you. I hope this brings you some comfort after what I know has been an unbearable ordeal. I owe you an explanation, though I know no explanation can ever be enough. First, I need you to know that I never stopped loving you. Not for a single day in our 35 years together. What I did, my relationship with Vivian, was born of weakness and ego, not a lack of love for you. Vivian came into my life 7 years ago, a bright, ambitious young woman who made me feel young again. It was the oldest story in the world, and I fell for it like the fool I was. But about a year ago, I began to suspect her motives weren't as genuine as I'd convinced myself. She began asking questions about the business, about our finances, about the details of my will. Around the same time, James and I discovered discrepancies in the company accounts. Large sums missing, traced to offshore accounts. At first, I suspected an employee, perhaps even James himself. But the more I investigated, the more the trail led back to Vivian, and beyond her, to someone else. Someone I trusted. I set a trap. I let Vivian believe I was changing my will in her favor. I even transferred the penthouse deed to her, with conditions I knew she would violate. I needed to see what she would do, who she would contact, once she believed she had secured my fortune. What I didn't anticipate was dying before my investigation was complete. I never meant for you to suffer as you have. I had arrangements in place for your care, money set aside that Vivian couldn't touch. But when I died unexpectedly, those arrangements weren't yet finalized. Eleanor, I know I've hurt you beyond measure. I know my betrayal cut deeper than any wound. But I'm asking you now to finish what I started. Find out who is working with Vivian. Discover who has been stealing from our company, from our life's work. In my safe, the combination is still your birthday. You'll find everything I've collected so far. Bank records, emails, photographs. It's not complete, but it's a start. Be careful, my love. Whoever is behind this has already killed once. I believe my heart attack wasn't natural. I'd been receiving threatening messages in the weeks before. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to worry. Another mistake in a long line of them. I know I have no right to ask anything of you after what I've done. But please, Eleanor, find the truth. Not for me, but for yourself. For justice. With all my love and deepest regrets. Richard. I stared at the letter, reading it once, twice, 3 times. My hands shook so badly the papers rattled. Richard had been murdered. He believed Vivian was working with someone else, someone close to us. And now I was in danger too. I moved to the painting behind his desk, a Monet original we'd purchased on our 20th anniversary. It swung away from the wall, revealing the safe. With trembling fingers, I enter the combination, 0-7-1-5, my birthday, and the door clicked open. Inside was a thick manila folder labeled simply, Evidence. Next to it lay a small black notebook, Richard's private journal. And beneath both, something that made my blood run cold. A gun. Richard had never owned a gun in his life. He'd been firmly against them. Yet here it was, loaded and ready. I reached for the folder first, opening it to find exactly what Richard's letter had promised. Bank statements, emails, surveillance photos. My eyes widened as I began to understand the scope of what he'd uncovered. This wasn't just embezzlement. It was something much bigger, much more dangerous. And there, in a photo taken at what appeared to be a private meeting, was Vivian. Sitting across from her, heads bent close in conversation, was a face I recognized all too well. Margot Landry, my closest friend for 20 years. The same Margot who'd been bringing me food while I lived in my car. Who'd kept me informed about Vivian's activities. Who'd been the only person who knew exactly where I was at all times during the past 2 months. The phone in my pocket buzzed. A text message from Margot. Heard the news about the will. I'm so happy for you. Coming over to celebrate. Be there in 20. I stared at the message, then back at the photo. Ice forming in my veins. She was coming here. Now. And suddenly, everything made terrible sense. The way Margot had always seemed to know what Vivian was doing. The way she'd discouraged me from fighting back sooner. The evidence of my supposed knowledge of Richard's affairs. My closest friend had been working with my husband's mistress all along. And now, believing I was alone and vulnerable, she was coming to finish what they'd started. I closed the safe, hiding the evidence once more. I tucked Richard's letter into my pocket. And then, after a moment's hesitation, I reached back into the safe and took out the gun. Whatever game Margot and Vivian had been playing, it ended today. I might have been naive about Richard's infidelity, but I was no longer the same trusting woman I'd been 2 months ago. Living in my car had hardened me. Losing everything had taught me what really mattered. And Richard's final confession had given me a purpose. Find the truth. As I heard the elevator chime, announcing Margot's arrival, I slipped the gun into my blazer pocket and prepared to face the woman who'd pretended to be my friend while orchestrating my downfall. The game wasn't over. It had only just begun. I tucked the gun into the waistband of my skirt at the small of my back, pulling my blazer down to cover it. The weight of it felt foreign, dangerous. I'd never held a gun before, let alone considered using one. But Richard's words echoed in my mind. Whoever is behind this has already killed once. The elevator chimed again, and I heard the doors slide open. Margot's voice rang out, falsely cheerful. "Eleanor, where are you, darling?" "I brought champagne." I took a deep breath, smoothed my expression, and stepped out of Richard's study into the main living area. Margot stood there, resplendent in a designer dress, holding an expensive bottle of Dom Perignon. Her smile was wide, her arms open for an embrace. 20 years of friendship, countless confidences shared, holidays spent together. And all along, she'd been plotting against me. "There you are," she exclaimed, moving toward me. "Oh, Eleanor, I'm so happy for you." When I heard about the will, I nearly fainted with joy. I forced a smile, accepting her embrace while keeping my body stiff, making sure she couldn't feel the gun at my back. "Thank you for coming, Margot. It's been quite a day." She pulled back, her eyes roaming over the penthouse. "I see that witch didn't waste any time redecorating. Don't worry, we'll get it back to your style in no time." She thrust the champagne bottle toward me. "Let's celebrate. Where are your glasses?" "In the kitchen," I said, taking the bottle. "Why don't you have a seat? I'll get everything." In the kitchen, I set the champagne on the counter and leaned against it, my heart hammering. What was I doing? Was I really prepared to confront Margot with a gun? What if I was wrong? What if there was an innocent explanation for that photo? But deep down, I knew. The pieces fit too perfectly. Margot had been the one feeding me information about Vivian, carefully selected information, no doubt. She'd been the one encouraging me to keep my distance, to not fight back too soon. She'd been keeping tabs on me, reporting back to Vivian, and to whoever else was involved. I opened a drawer and took out a corkscrew, then thought better of it. I didn't want alcohol clouding my judgment. Instead, I filled 2 water glasses and returned to the living room. Margot had made herself comfortable on my sofa, or rather, the sleek modern monstrosity that had replaced my comfortable sectional. She raised an eyebrow at the water glasses. "No champagne. I think I need a clear head right now," I said, setting the glasses on the coffee table. Instead of sitting beside her, I took the chair opposite. "There's a lot to process." She nodded sympathetically. "Of course, darling. It must be overwhelming. One day you're living in your car, and the next you're a wealthy widow again." She reached for my hand across the table. "I'm just so glad justice was served. That Vivian woman got exactly what she deserved." I withdrew my hand before she could touch me. "Did she?" Something flickered across Margot's face, a momentary tightening around her eyes, quickly masked. "Well, of course. She tried to steal everything from you, and now she's left with nothing. It's poetic justice." I took a sip of water, watching her over the rim of the glass. "You know, the strangest thing happened at the will reading." "Oh." Her voice was light, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. "Richard left a letter for me, explaining everything." Margot's smile froze. "Everything? About Vivian? About the embezzlement from his company? About how he suspected his heart attack wasn't natural?" I set my glass down carefully. "About how Vivian wasn't working alone." She laughed, but it sounded forced. "That's quite a letter." Richard always did have a flair for the dramatic. "He had evidence, Margot." I kept my voice steady, watching her reaction. "Bank records, emails, photos." The color drained from her face. Photos of Vivian meeting with her accomplice, her real partner. I leaned forward. "It was you, wasn't it? All this time, my dearest friend, and you were working with the woman who was sleeping with my husband." For a moment, Margot looked genuinely shocked. Then her expression hardened, the friendly mask slipping away entirely. "You don't know what you're talking about, Eleanor." "Don't I? For 2 months, I lived in my car. For 2 months, I sold my jewelry piece by piece just to eat. And where were you? Bringing me sandwiches and sympathy while reporting back to Vivian about my every move." Margot stood abruptly. "I think I should go." "Sit down." I reached behind me and pulled out the gun, pointing it at her. My hand shook slightly, but my resolve didn't waver. "We're not done talking." Her eyes widened at the sight of the weapon. Eleanor, have you lost your mind?
Sit
Down. I emphasized each word, and this time she obeyed, sinking back onto the sofa. Now, you're going to tell me everything. Starting with why. Why betray me? Why help Vivian? What did Richard ever do to you? Margot's face contorted with a hatred I'd never seen before. What did he do? He destroyed my life, Eleanor. He destroyed my family. I frowned, genuinely confused. What are you talking about? My brother, David. The one I told you died in a car accident 15 years ago. Her voice trembled with anger. It wasn't an accident. He killed himself after Richard's company foreclosed on his business. David had borrowed heavily to expand, and when the market crashed, he fell behind on payments. He begged Richard for more time, just a few months to turn things around. But Richard refused. He took everything. The business my brother had built from nothing, the building our father had left him, even his house. I shook my head, stunned. That's not possible. Richard would have told me. Would he? The great Richard Winters, admitting he drove a man to suicide? I don't think so. She laughed bitterly. He probably didn't even remember David's name. Just another failed investment to write off. So all these years, our friendship, it was just revenge, she finished for me. Yes, Eleanor. I befriended the wife of the man who destroyed my brother. I worked my way into your life, gained your trust, learned everything about Richard's business. And then I found Vivian. You introduced her to Richard. I realized the pieces falling into place. The charity gala 7 years ago. You insisted we attend, said it was important to you. And you brought Vivian as your guest. Margot smiled coldly. She was perfect, young, beautiful, ambitious. Exactly the type to turn Richard's head. And turn it she did. But why? What was the point? Initially?
To destroy your marriage.
To make Richard do to you what he'd done to my brother. Take everything you loved. Her expression darkened. But then we discovered something much more valuable. Richard's company wasn't just investing in legitimate businesses. There was a whole shadow operation, money laundering for some very dangerous people. Once we had evidence of that, the plan changed. My mind reeled. Richard involved in money laundering? It seemed impossible. I don't believe you. Check his safe. Look at the offshore accounts. It's all there. The gun felt heavier in my hand. So, what was the new plan? Blackmail, at first. Vivian would threaten to expose him unless he signed over assets to her. That's why he transferred the penthouse deed. She leaned forward, her eyes glittering. But Richard was smarter than we gave him credit for. He figured out what we were doing. He started gathering his own evidence against us. So we had to act faster. A chill ran through me. You killed him. For the first time, Margot looked uncomfortable. Not directly. We arranged for certain medications to be switched. Nothing traceable. A heart attack in a man his age, with his stress levels? No one would question it. I felt sick. This woman I trusted, who'd held me while I cried at Richard's funeral, had orchestrated his murder. And after he died, what then? The plan was simple. Vivian would claim the penthouse, force you out. I would be your shoulder to cry on, keep track of your movements. Meanwhile, we'd access Richard's accounts, transfer the funds, and disappear before anyone realized what had happened.
She sighed.
But Richard outplayed us from beyond the grave. That damn Will. So what now, Margot? You've confessed to conspiracy, fraud, and murder. Do you really think I'm going to let you walk out of here? She smiled, a slow, confident smile that made my blood run cold. Yes, Eleanor, I do. Because you're not going to shoot me. You don't have it in you. She stood up slowly. And because you're forgetting one very important detail. Which is, I'm not working alone either. The realization hit me a second too late. I heard movement behind me. Footsteps I'd failed to notice, while focused on Margot. Before I could turn, something hard struck the back of my head. The gun fell from my hand as pain exploded through my skull. The room tilted sideways, and then darkness swept over me. I woke to the sound of voices arguing. My head throbbed viciously, and when I tried to move, I discovered my hands were bound behind my back. I was lying on the floor of Richard's study, partially hidden behind his desk. Through barely open eyes, I could see Margot pacing back and forth, while a man's voice, vaguely familiar, spoke in angry, hushed tones. This wasn't the plan, Margot. We agreed. No violence unless absolutely necessary. She had a gun, James. What was I supposed to do? Let her shoot me?
James.
James Wilson, Richard's business partner. You were supposed to keep her distracted until I found the evidence Richard collected, not provoke a confrontation. James came into view, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair in frustration. Now what? We can't just kill her. There are too many people who know she came back here today. We don't have to kill her, Margot said, her voice chillingly calm. We just need to discredit her. Make it look like she had a breakdown. After all, the poor woman's been living in her car for 2 months, discovered her husband was cheating, learned about embezzlement in his company. It would be perfectly understandable if she snapped. And how exactly do we do that? James demanded. Margot's smile was pure evil. We call Vivian. Tell her to bring the papers, the ones we forged with Eleanor's signature. We stage a confrontation, make it look like Eleanor attacked us in a delusional rage. By the time she convinces anyone she's sane, we'll be long gone with the money. I closed my eyes, fighting panic. I needed to think. The gun was gone, my hands were tied, and my head felt like it was splitting open. But I wasn't beaten yet. Not after everything I'd survived these past 2 months. Carefully, I tested my bonds. Rope, not too tight. They'd been in a hurry and hadn't secured me properly. If I could work my hands free without them noticing.
Fine, James was saying.
Call Vivian. But hurry. Franklin Morris knows I came here. If I don't check in soon, he'll get suspicious. Margot pulled out her phone and stepped out of the study, presumably to make the call. James immediately moved to Richard's safe, entering the combination as if he'd done it 100 times before. Of course, as Richard's business partner, he would have known my birthday. The safe swung open, and James began rifling through it, muttering to himself. Where is it? It has to be here. Richard wouldn't have trusted anyone else with it. I worked my wrists back and forth, feeling the rope begin to loosen. Just a little more. Found it, James exclaimed softly, pulling out a small external hard drive I hadn't noticed before. He pocketed it quickly, then continued searching the safe, removing Richard's evidence folder and flipping through it. My right hand slipped free of the rope. I kept still, waiting for the right moment. James was armed. I could see a gun holstered at his hip. I'd have one chance, and one chance only. Margot returned, looking pleased with herself. Vivian's on her way. 15 minutes, tops. Good. I found the drive. James held up the folder. And most of the evidence Richard collected. But there's still the letter he left Eleanor. She said he explained everything. Check her pockets, Margot suggested. She probably has it on her. James nodded, turning toward me. I closed my eyes fully, feigning unconsciousness. I heard his footsteps approach, felt him kneel beside me. His hand reached into my blazer pocket, searching for Richard's letter.
Now.
I drove my elbow upward with all my strength, catching him under the chin. His head snapped back, and he fell backwards with a grunt of pain. In the same motion, I rolled away, scrambling to my feet. James! Margot shouted, rushing forward. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the heavy crystal paperweight from Richard's desk and hurled it at her. It caught her in the shoulder, sending her stumbling back with a cry of pain. James was already recovering, reaching for his gun. I lunged forward, kicking him hard in the wrist. The gun skittered across the floor. We both dove for it. His fingers closed around the handle a split second before mine. He rolled onto his back, aiming at my chest. Don't move, Eleanor. I froze, hands raised. James, think about what you're doing. Murder? Money laundering?
This isn't you.
He laughed bitterly. You don't know me, Eleanor. You never did. Richard kept his work life separate, remember? You never questioned where the money came from, how we always managed to beat the market. You just enjoyed the benefits. So it's true? The money laundering? James got to his feet, keeping the gun trained on me. It started small, a favor for a client with connections. Then it grew. The profits were too good to walk away from. His expression hardened. But Richard got cold feet. Said he wanted out, wanted to come clean. He would have ruined everything. So you killed him. My voice shook with rage. Your partner for 20 years, and you killed him. Business is business, Eleanor. Nothing personal. He gestured with the gun. Now move over there, next to Margot. Slowly. I complied, my mind racing for a way out. Margot stood by the window, holding her injured shoulder, her face twisted with hatred. Outside the study, I heard the elevator chime. Vivian had arrived. James, her voice called out. Margot? Where is everyone? In here, James called back. We've got a situation. Vivian appeared in the doorway, as glamorous as ever despite her earlier humiliation at the will reading. Her eyes widened slightly at the sight of me standing there, apparently unrestrained. What's going on? I thought you said she was tied up. She got loose, James said tersely. But it doesn't matter. We have what we need. He patted his pocket where the hard drive was hidden. Did you bring the papers? Vivian nodded, holding up a folder. Right here. Eleanor's signed confession that she knew about Richard's affairs and approved them, along with evidence that she was embezzling from the company herself. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. No one will believe that. They will when they find your fingerprints all over it, Margot said. And when Vivian and I testify that you admitted everything to us right before you had a psychotic break and attacked us. James nodded. It's 3 against 1, Eleanor. And you're the one who's been living in your car, growing more unstable by the day. Who do you think people will believe? He had a point. I was trapped, outnumbered, with no proof beyond Richard's letter. The letter? You never found the letter, did you? I said suddenly. You checked my pocket, but it wasn't there. James frowned. Where is it? I smiled, a small triumph in the midst of disaster. Somewhere you'll never find it, and I've already made copies. One is with Franklin Morris right now. A lie, but they couldn't know that. Uncertainty flickered across James's face. You're bluffing. Am I? Franklin was the one who gave me the letter. Do you really think Richard wouldn't have left a copy with his lawyer? Another lie, but a plausible one. Enough of this, Vivian snapped. We're wasting time. Let's just get what we came for and deal with her. James nodded. Vivian's right. We need to focus on the plan. He turned to me, his expression cold. Here's what's going to happen, Eleanor. You're going to sign these papers, confessing to your knowledge of Richard's affairs and your own embezzlement. Then you're going to have an unfortunate accident, nothing fatal, just enough to put you in a psychiatric hold for a while. By the time you convince anyone you're sane, the money will be gone, and so will we. And if I refuse? His smile was chilling. Then we moved to Plan B. It would be a shame if something happened to that nice young couple living in 14B. What are their names? The Patels? With the new baby? My blood ran cold. He was threatening my neighbors, innocent people who had nothing to do with any of this. You wouldn't. Try me. For a moment, I considered my options. There weren't many. I was outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of time. I needed to stall, to find an opening. Fine, I said finally. I'll sign your papers. But I want to read them first. James looked at Vivian, who shrugged. Let her read them. What difference does it make? All right, James agreed. But no tricks, Eleanor. Remember the Patels. Vivian stepped forward, holding out the folder. As I reached for it, my fingers brushed hers, and I saw something unexpected in her eyes. Not triumph, not hatred, but fear. I opened the folder, pretending to read the forged documents while my mind worked furiously. Vivian was afraid. Not of me, but of something or someone else. James? Margot? Or a fourth player I hadn't identified yet. This is ridiculous, I said, looking up from the papers. No one will believe I voluntarily signed away my rights to Richard's estate. They will when they see the evidence of your gambling problem, Margot said smugly. The online accounts we create in your name, the massive debts, the desperate need for cash. It's all there, a perfect motive for embezzlement. I shook my head in disbelief. You've thought of everything, haven't you? We've had 7 years to plan this, Eleanor, Vivian said quietly. Ever since Margot introduced me to Richard, something in her tone made me look at her more closely. There was resignation there, a weariness that didn't match her triumphant words. I decided to take a risk. And what did Margot promise you, Vivian? A fair split of the money? A new life somewhere exotic? I laughed softly. Do you really believe she'll keep her word? After all, she betrayed her best friend of 20 years. What makes you think you're any different? Vivian's eyes flicked to Margot, then back to me. Shut up and sign the papers. Or what? You'll kill me? Like you killed Richard? I took a step closer to her, ignoring James's warning gesture with a gun. Except you didn't actually kill Richard, did you? That was James and Margot. They just used you as the honey trap, the distraction, the expendable part of the plan. I said, shut up. Vivian's voice rose, tinged with panic. They're going to betray you, Vivian.
Just like they betrayed me.
Just like they betrayed Richard. Once they have the money, do you really think they'll keep you around? A liability who knows all their secrets. Enough. James stepped forward, pressing the gun to my temple. Sign the papers, Eleanor.
Now.
I met Vivian's eyes one last time, silently pleading. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something. Doubt, perhaps, or the faintest spark of conscience. Then her expression hardened, and she thrust a pen at me. Sign it. I took the pen, my hand trembling. Not with fear, but with fury. These people had taken everything from me, my husband, my home, my dignity. And now they wanted to take my freedom, my sanity, possibly even my life. I looked down at the papers, the damning false confession they'd prepared. I had to sign, had to buy more time, had to find a way out of this impossible situation. The pen hovered over the signature line. James pressed the gun harder against my head. Do it. And then, salvation came from the most unexpected source. The elevator chimed again. Everyone froze. We weren't expecting anyone else. James's eyes widened in alarm. Who the hell is that? Footsteps approached the study. A familiar voice called out. Eleanor? Are you here? It's Franklin. I brought those documents you asked for. Franklin Morris, the lawyer, my potential savior if I could allure him to the danger. James moved quickly, grabbing me around the neck and pressing the gun to my head. Not a sound, he hissed in my ear. To Margot and Vivian he mouthed, get rid of him. Margot nodded, composing herself. She stepped out of the study, closing the door partway behind her. Franklin, what a surprise. Eleanor's just stepped out for a moment. Something about picking up some personal items. I couldn't hear Franklin's response, but Margot's nervous laugh drifted back to us. Oh, I'm just waiting for her to return. James and I were discussing some business matters. James's arm tightened around my neck, cutting off my air. Black spots danced before my eyes. This was it, my last chance. I had to act now, or never. With all my remaining strength, I drove my elbow backward into James's stomach. He grunted in pain, his grip loosening just enough. I screamed as loud as I could. Franklin, help! They're trying to kill me. Everything happened at once. The study door burst open. Franklin stood there, eyes wide with shock. Behind him, I glimpsed 2 uniformed police officers. James swore, shoving me aside and raising his gun. Vivian shrieked. Margot lunged for the evidence folder. And then chaos. One of the officers tackled James, sending them both crashing into Richard's desk. The gun went off, the bullet shattering a window. The second officer grabbed Margot as she tried to flee. Franklin rushed to my side, helping me up from where I'd fallen. Are you all right, Eleanor? He asked urgently. I nodded, too stunned to speak. My gaze found Vivian, standing frozen by the window, watching as her accomplices were subdued. Our eyes met, and in that moment, I saw the realization dawn on her face. It was over. All of it. One of the officers approached her. "Vivian Lane? You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, accessory to embezzlement, and murder." I finished, my voice hoarse. "They killed Richard. All three of them." The officer nodded grimly. "We'll add that to the charges. Miss Lane, please turn around and place your hands behind your back." Vivian complied without resistance, her shoulders slumping in defeat. As the officer handcuffed her, she looked at me one last time. "I never wanted him dead, Eleanor."
You have to believe that.
"It wasn't supposed to go this far." I said nothing. What could I say? That I forgave her? That I understood? I didn't. I doubted I ever would. As the police led all three conspirators away, Franklin guided me to a chair. "I've been trying to reach you all afternoon," he explained. "When I couldn't get through, I became concerned, especially after James left my office in such a hurry, saying he needed to speak with you urgently." "How did you know to bring the police?" I asked, still trying to process what had just happened. Franklin smiled grimly. "I didn't trust James. Never have. When Richard came to me a few weeks before his death, sharing his suspicions about embezzlement in the company, James's name was at the top of his list." He patted my hand. "I've been working with investigators behind the scenes, gathering evidence. We were close to making arrests when Richard died." "So you knew? All this time, you knew what was happening?" His expression turned regretful. "Not everything. I suspected James was involved in something illegal, but I had no idea about Margot or Vivian. And I certainly didn't know they'd go as far as murder." He sighed heavily. "I'm so sorry, Eleanor. I should have warned you." I shook my head. "You couldn't have known." I reached into my shoe, where I'd hidden Richard's letter while unconscious, and handed it to him. "Read this. It explains a lot." As Franklin read, his face grew increasingly grim. When he finished, he carefully folded the letter and handed it back to me. "This is crucial evidence. The police will need to see it." I nodded wearily. "I know. But first, I need to understand everything. The whole truth." "Of course. But perhaps not tonight. You've been through a terrible ordeal. You should rest, let a doctor examine you." He was right. My head throbbed where James had struck me, and exhaustion pulled at every limb. But there was one more thing I needed to know. "Franklin, the offshore accounts, the money laundering, was Richard really involved?" Franklin hesitated, clearly weighing how much to tell me. Finally, he sighed. "Yes and no. Richard discovered the operation about a year ago. James had been running it for years without Richard's knowledge, using the company as a front. When Richard found out, he didn't go to the authorities immediately. Instead, he began gathering evidence, trying to understand the full scope of the operation. Why didn't he just report it? Because of the consequences. The scandal would have destroyed the company, cost hundreds of innocent employees their jobs. Richard was trying to find a way to expose James without causing collateral damage." Franklin's expression softened. "He was trying to protect you, too, Eleanor. He knew how much the company meant to you, the charitable foundation you ran through it. He didn't want to see your work destroyed by James's crimes." It sounded like Richard, always trying to fix everything himself, always trying to protect me, even when I didn't need protection, even when his secrecy only made things worse. "And now," I asked, "what happens to the company?" "That depends on you. As Richard's heir, you own his share. The board will need to be informed of James's activities, of course, but with careful management, the company can survive this." I nodded slowly, too exhausted to think about business decisions. "Thank you, Franklin, for everything." He squeezed my hand gently. "Richard was my friend. Taking care of you is the least I can do to honor his memory." As Franklin helped me to my feet, a police officer approached, looking apologetic. "Mrs. Winters? I'm Detective Ramirez. I know this has been a difficult day, but we need your statement while events are still fresh." I straightened my shoulders, finding strength I didn't know I still possessed. "Of course, Detective. Where would you like to start?" From the beginning, ma'am. Tell me everything. And so I did. I told them about finding Richard dead in our bed, about Vivian appearing at my door, evicting me from my home, about living in my car for 2 months, about the will reading and Richard's letter, about Margot's betrayal and James's confession. Hours later, after the police had finally gone and Franklin had insisted on calling a private security team to guard the penthouse overnight, I found myself alone in what had once been my home. Vivian's gaudy redecorating suddenly seemed like the least of my concerns. I wandered from room to room, touching familiar objects, remembering the life I'd shared with Richard. A life that, I now realized, had been built partly on secrets and lies. Richard had kept his business separate from our marriage, never letting me see the darker aspects of his work. And I had chosen not to look too closely, to accept the wealth and privilege without questioning its source. In my bedroom, I found Vivian's clothes still hanging in the closet, her perfume bottles arranged on the vanity that had once held my things. With a sudden burst of energy, I began gathering her belongings, stuffing them into garbage bags. I stripped the bed she had shared with my husband, throwing the expensive sheets down the trash chute. I scrubbed the bathroom until my hands were raw, erasing every trace of her presence. By dawn, exhausted but unable to sleep, I sat in Richard's study, staring at the safe that had held so many secrets. The police had taken most of the evidence, but they'd left Richard's journal, deeming it personal rather than relevant to the case. I opened it, turning to the final entries. Richard's elegant handwriting filled the pages, documenting his growing suspicions about James, his discovery of the money laundering operation, his growing fear that Vivian wasn't what she seemed. The last entry, dated just 3 days before his death, broke my heart. I've made so many mistakes. The business, Vivian, keeping secrets from Eleanor. I thought I was protecting her, but I've only put her in danger.
I need to make this right.
Tomorrow, I'll tell her everything. No more secrets. No more lies. If she can forgive me, perhaps we can start again. If not, I'll have lost the only thing that ever truly mattered.
He never got to tell me.
Never got the chance to make amends. James, Margot, and Vivian had seen to that. A knock at the study door startled me. One of the security guards Franklin had hired stood there, looking apologetic. Sorry to disturb you, Mrs. Winters, but there's someone here to see you. A Ms. Chen? She says she's from Franklin Morris's office. Melissa Chen, the young lawyer who had taken notes at the will reading. Send her in, please. Melissa entered a moment later, looking tired but determined. In her hand, she carried a thick folder. Mrs. Winters, I apologize for the early hour, but Mr. Morris thought you should see these right away. What are they? She placed the folder on the desk. Financial records. Mr. Morris had me working through the night, tracking the money from the offshore accounts. I opened the folder, my eyes widening at the complex web of transactions documented there. Is this evidence of where the money went? Yes. Melissa pointed to a name that appeared repeatedly in the transaction records. This is the primary beneficiary of the laundered funds. Mr. Morris thought you should know before the police do. I stared at the name, disbelief washing over me. It couldn't be. It simply couldn't be. Senator Edward Winters, Richard's brother. This can't be right, I whispered. Edward and Richard barely spoke. They hadn't been close in years. Melissa nodded grimly. That's what Mr. Morris said. But the evidence is clear. Senator Winters has been receiving millions in laundered funds for at least 5 years. My mind reeled. Edward, Richard's older brother, the respected 3-term senator with presidential ambitions. The man who had eulogized Richard at his funeral, shedding photogenic tears for the cameras. The man who had comforted me, promised to help me through this difficult time. Does Edward know about all this? About Margot and James and Vivian? We don't know yet. But Mr. Morris thinks it's likely he was the mastermind behind everything. James Wilson was his college roommate, long before Richard ever met him. And Senator Winters was the one who recommended James as a partner when Richard was starting the company. The implications were staggering. Had Edward orchestrated everything from the beginning? Planted James in Richard's company to facilitate the money laundering? Used Margot and Vivian to distract Richard when he got too close to the truth? Had Edward ordered his own brother's murder? There's more, Melissa continued, pulling another document from the folder. This is a copy of an email sent from Senator Winters to James Wilson the day before Richard died. It's quite explicit. I took the paper with trembling hands. The message was brief, but chilling. Jay, time has run out. Our knows too much. Implement contingency planned immediately. No evidence, no witnesses. A death sentence, delivered in 10 words. The police don't have this yet, Melissa explained. Mr. Morris wanted you to see it first, to be prepared. He's meeting with the FBI this morning. The FBI. Of course. This went beyond simple murder and embezzlement now. This was political corruption at the highest level. What should I do? I asked, feeling overwhelmed. Mr. Morris suggests you stay here, keep the security team close, and don't speak to anyone, especially not Senator Winters, until he returns from the FBI meeting. I nodded numbly. Thank you, Melissa. After she left, I sat in Richard's chair, staring at the evidence of his brother's betrayal. Edward, who had always been the successful brother, Ivy League education, political career, perfect family. Edward, who had always seemed slightly resentful of Richard's financial success, his happy marriage, his freedom from public scrutiny. Edward, who was scheduled to announce his presidential campaign next month. The phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. I checked the caller ID, my blood freezing in my veins. Senator Edward Winters. My finger hovered over the answer button. Franklin had said not to speak to anyone, especially Edward. But if I didn't answer, wouldn't that alert him that something was wrong? The phone continued to ring. 4 rings. 5. On the 6th, I made my decision and picked up. Hello, Edward. Eleanor. Thank God you answered. His voice sounded genuinely relieved. I just heard about what happened. The police arrest at your penthouse. Are you all right? How did he know already? The arrests had only happened hours ago, and it was barely 7 a.m. I'm fine, I said carefully. Just a little shaken. I can imagine. When they told me James Wilson was involved in some kind of embezzlement scheme, I could hardly believe it. He always seemed so trustworthy. Who told you, Edward? A slight pause. I have friends in the police department. They know Richard was my brother.
Of course he did.
Edward had connections everywhere, which meant he likely already knew that the investigation was expanding beyond James, Margot, and Vivian. Have they told you anything else? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. About who else might be involved? Another pause, longer this time. No, nothing specific.
Why? Do you know something?
The hair on the back of my neck stood up. There was something in his tone, a tension that hadn't been there before.
No, elite.
I'm still trying to process everything myself. Of course, of course.
His voice softened.
Listen, Eleanor, I think you should get out of that penthouse for a while. Too many bad memories. Why don't you come stay with Margaret and me? We have plenty of room, and you shouldn't be alone right now. A trap. It had to be. Edward knew the walls were closing in, and he wanted me where he could control me, or worse. That's very kind of you, Edward, but I think I need to be here. The police may have more questions. All the more reason to get some distance. I can arrange for them to interview you at my home. It would be much more controlled. There it was. Control. Edward had always been about control. I appreciate the offer, but I'll stay here. His voice hardened slightly. I really think you should reconsider, Eleanor. It's not safe for you there. Whoever was working with James might come after you next. The irony would have been laughable if it weren't so terrifying. I have security, Edward. Franklin arranged it. Franklin Morris? That old fool? What does he know about security? Edward was losing his composure now. Listen to me, Eleanor. I'm coming to get you. We'll sort this out together, as a family. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Before I could protest, he hung up. Panic surged through me. Edward was coming here. The man who had likely ordered his own brother's murder was coming for me, and I had no way to stop him. The police were gone. Franklin was meeting with the FBI. My security team consisted of 2 men in the lobby who wouldn't stand a chance against a United States senator and whatever security he brought with him. I had 30 minutes, maybe less, to figure out a way to survive. 30 minutes. Maybe less. The clock was ticking, and with each passing second, my chances of survival diminished. I reached for the phone to call Franklin, then stopped. What if Edward had the phones tapped? What if he was monitoring my calls? He clearly had connections everywhere, police, possibly FBI, certainly within Richard's company. I couldn't risk it. Instead, I grabbed my cell phone and texted Melissa Chin. Edward coming here in 30 minutes, says not safe. Trying to take me to his house. What do I do? Her response came almost immediately. Don't go with him.
Stall.
Mr. Morris contacting FBI now. Hide evidence somewhere safe. We'll send help. Hide the evidence. Of course. I looked down at the folder Melissa had brought, the damning paper trail that connected Edward to the money laundering operation. If Edward found it here, it would disappear forever, and possibly me with it. But where could I hide it? Edward knew this penthouse as well as I did. He'd been here countless times over the years for dinners, holidays, business discussions with Richard. He would know all the obvious hiding places. My gaze fell on Richard's journal, still open on the desk. The last entry stared up at me accusingly. No more secrets. No more lies. Richard had kept secrets to protect me, and those secrets had led to his death. I wouldn't make the same mistake. I gathered the folder, Richard's journal, and his letter, and hurried to the master bedroom. The security team Franklin had hired consisted of 2 men, one stationed in the lobby, one outside my door. I needed to get past them without raising suspicion. In the bedroom, I changed quickly into casual clothes, jeans, a sweater, and comfortable shoes. I stuffed the documents into a nondescript tote bag along with my wallet, phone, and a small framed photo of Richard and me from happier times. Then I picked up the house phone and called down to the security guard at my door. Steve, I'm going to take a shower. Could you please tell the lobby that if my brother-in-law, Senator Winters, arrives, he should wait in the living room? I'll be about 20 minutes. Of course, Mrs. Winters. Would you like me to remain at the door while the senator is here? Bless him for offering, but one security guard would be no match for whatever Edward brought with him. No, that's all right. He's family. You can take a break once he arrives. Are you sure, ma'am? Mr. Morris was quite specific. I'm sure, I interrupted, hoping I sounded confident rather than terrified. My brother-in-law is here to help. But thank you for your concern. I hung up before he could protest further. 20 minutes, that's what I told them. In reality, I had no intention of taking a shower. Instead, I went into the bathroom, turned on the shower to create the illusion I was in there, and then moved to the walk-in closet that connected to the master bedroom. Years ago, Richard had installed a private elevator in our closet, his executive escape route, he'd jokingly called it. It had seemed like an extravagant paranoia at the time, but now I thanked God for my husband's foresight. The elevator bypassed the main building system, running straight from our penthouse to a private garage beneath the building. Only Richard and I had the key card to operate it. I slipped into the closet, closing the door behind me. At the back, behind a panel designed to look like part of the wall, was the elevator. I swiped the key card I kept hidden in a jewelry box, and the doors slid open silently. Heart pounding, I stepped inside and pressed the button for the garage level. As the elevator descended, I leaned against the wall, trying to calm my racing heart. What was my plan? I couldn't just run forever. Edward had resources I couldn't hope to match. Eventually, he would find me, unless I found evidence that could stop him first. The elevator doors opened onto a small, dimly lit garage that housed Richard's prized vintage car collection. 5 vehicles gleamed under soft lights: a 1965 Aston Martin, a 1957 Corvette, a 1970 Jaguar E-Type, a 1963 Ferrari 250 GT, and a more modest 1972 Mercedes sedan that Richard had bought when we were first married. All collectible, all valuable, but the Mercedes held a special place in our history. It was the car we'd driven cross-country on our honeymoon, the car in which we'd brought our daughter home from the hospital. Our daughter, Emily. A fresh wave of grief, washed over me. Emily had died of leukemia at 17, 20 years ago. The loss had nearly destroyed us, but somehow our marriage had survived, strengthened, even, by the shared grief. Or so I'd thought. I pushed the painful memories aside. Now wasn't the time for nostalgia. I needed transportation, and I needed it to be untraceable. The modern cars all had GPS systems that Edward could potentially track. But the vintage cars, especially the older ones like the Mercedes, I moved to the Mercedes, running my hand over its sleek silver body. Richard had kept all the cars in perfect working condition, taking them out regularly for drives. The keys were kept in a locked cabinet on the wall. I opened it with the same key card that operated the elevator and selected the Mercedes keys. As I slid into the driver's seat, a wave of memories threatened to overwhelm me. Richard and I, young and in love, singing along to the radio as we drove through the desert. Richard teaching Emily how to drive in this very car, both of them laughing as she stalled the engine repeatedly. The three of us, a family, whole and happy. Before cancer took Emily. Before Vivian took Richard. Before greed and corruption took everything else. I started the engine, which purred to life as reliably as it had 40 years ago. The garage door opened automatically, and I drove out into the early morning light, leaving behind the penthouse and, hopefully, Edward's imminent arrival. But where to go? I couldn't go to Franklin's office. That would be the first place Edward would look. I couldn't go to any of my friends. I no longer knew who to trust after Margot's betrayal. Hotels required ID, which meant they could be traced. I needed somewhere Edward would never think to look for me. Somewhere he wouldn't even know existed. And then it hit me. The lake house. Early in our marriage, when Richard was just beginning to build his business and money was still tight, we'd purchased a small cabin on Lake Evergreen, about 2 hours from the city. It was nothing fancy, just 2 bedrooms, a simple kitchen, and a porch overlooking the water. As Richard's wealth grew, we'd kept the cabin but visited it less frequently. After Emily died, we'd stopped going altogether. The memories were too painful. As far as I knew, we still owned it. Richard had never mentioned selling it, and I'd seen the property tax bills come in each year. Most importantly, Edward didn't know about it. We'd bought it before Richard reconnected with his estranged brother, and we'd never taken Edward there. It was perfect, remote, forgotten, and completely off Edward's radar. I merged onto the highway heading north out of the city, constantly checking my rearview mirror for any sign of pursuit. My phone buzzed with a text. Melissa again. Where are you? Edward arrived at penthouse. Security says you're in shower. I pulled over briefly to respond. Left through private elevator. Heading somewhere safe. Will contact when secure. Her reply was immediate. Smart move. Edward arrived with 4 men. Security team. Stay hidden. Morris meeting FBI now. For men. A senator didn't need that kind of security for a visit to his grieving sister-in-law. Edward had come prepared for resistance, or to remove evidence, and possibly me as well. I continued driving, forcing myself to maintain a normal speed despite the urge to floor the accelerator. The last thing I needed was to be pulled over for speeding. If Edward had connections in the police department, he might already have alerts out for me. 2 hours later, I turned off the main highway onto a series of increasingly narrow roads. The landscape changed from suburbs to forests, the houses growing farther apart until they disappeared altogether. Finally, I reached a gravel road that wound through thick pine trees. At the end sat our cabin, just as I remembered it. Weathered gray wood, blue shutters, a small dock extending into the clear lake waters. I parked the Mercedes behind the cabin, where it wouldn't be visible from the road. The key to the cabin was where we'd always kept it, in a small lockbox hidden under a false rock by the back steps. My fingers trembled as I retrieved it, half expecting it not to work after all these years. But the lock turned smoothly, and the door swung open. Inside, the cabin was dusty but untouched. Everything remained exactly as we'd left it 20 years ago. Emily's fishing rod still propped in the corner, her collection of lake stones still arranged on the windowsill, family photos still hanging on the walls. It was like stepping into a time capsule of our former life. I moved through the space like a ghost, touching familiar objects, remembering. On the mantel, a photo of the three of us, Richard, Emily, and me, smiled back at me, frozen in a moment of perfect happiness. I picked it up, wiping dust from the glass with my sleeve. We looked so young, so oblivious to the tragedies that awaited us. Emily's cancer, Richard's betrayal, my exile. Setting the photo down, I forced myself to focus on the present danger. I had the evidence against Edward, but what good was it if I couldn't get it to the authorities? My phone showed no service bars here. The cabin was too remote for reliable cell coverage. The landline had been disconnected years ago. I was safe, but I was also isolated. I unpacked the documents from my tote bag, spreading them across the kitchen table. Richard's journal, his letter to me, the financial records Melissa had provided, the email from Edward to James ordering Richard's death. Together, they told a damning story of corruption, betrayal, and murder that reached to the highest levels of power. But they were useless if I couldn't get them to the FBI. I would need to leave the cabin, drive to somewhere with cell service, and contact Franklin or Melissa. But not yet. Edward would be looking for me now, and the roads would be the first places people would watch. Better to wait until nightfall, when darkness would provide some cover. In the meantime, I needed to ensure the evidence survived even if I didn't. I found an old camera in a drawer, a digital model from the early 2000s that still had battery life. One by one, I photographed each document, each page of Richard's journal, each financial record. When I was done, I removed the memory card and hid it inside a hollow fishing lure in Emily's tackle box. Then I returned to the papers themselves, considering where to conceal them. The cabin had few good hiding places, but there was one Edward would never think to look, because only Emily, Richard, and I knew it existed. When Emily was 10, Richard had built a hidden compartment beneath one of the floorboards under her bed, a secret place for her to store her treasures. I moved to her bedroom, my heart aching at the sight of her things still arranged as she'd left them, the stuffed animals on the bed, the books on the shelf, the butterfly mobile hanging from the ceiling. Kneeling beside the bed, I located the right floorboard and carefully pried it up. The compartment beneath was empty save for a small, heart-shaped rock Emily had found on the shore and declared was magic. I placed the documents inside, next to her rock, and replaced the floorboard. Then I straightened the rug over it, erasing any sign of disturbance. Exhaustion suddenly washed over me. I hadn't slept in over 24 hours, and the emotional toll of everything, Richard's letter, the confrontation with Margot, James, and Vivian, the discovery of Edward's involvement, my escape from the penthouse, hit me all at once. I sank onto Emily's bed, intending to rest for just a moment. I must have fallen into a deep sleep, because when I woke, the room was dark. Night had fallen while I slept. I checked my watch. 9:47 p.m. I'd been asleep for hours. A sound from outside jolted me fully awake, the crunch of tires on gravel. Someone had arrived at the cabin. My heart pounded as I crept to the window, careful to stay hidden behind the curtain. A car had pulled up in front of the cabin, its headlights illuminating the porch. Not my Mercedes, which was still hidden behind the cabin. This was a large black SUV with tinted windows. Government issue. The kind of vehicle a senator might use. Edward had found me. But how? I'd told no one where I was going. The cabin wasn't in my name. Richard had purchased it before we were married, using a separate business entity to maintain privacy. There was no connection on paper between the Winters family and this property. Unless a cold realization washed over me. The property tax bills. They would have been sent to Richard's office, handled by his assistant. His assistant, who reported to James Wilson. James, who was connected to Edward. I backed away from the window as two men exited the SUV. Even in the darkness, I could see they were large, imposing figures dressed in dark suits. Security personnel, not unlike those Edward had brought to the penthouse. They approached the cabin cautiously, one moving toward the front door, the other circling around toward the back, and my hidden car. I had seconds to decide what to do. If they found me here, I was as good as dead. Edward wouldn't risk leaving me alive, not now that I knew everything. But if I fled into the surrounding forest at night, with no supplies, no phone service, and no idea where to go, my chances weren't much better. The memory card. The fishing lure. If nothing else, I had to make sure that evidence survived. I slipped back to the main room, retrieved the fishing lure from Emily's tackle box, and tucked it securely in my bra. Then I grabbed a kitchen knife, a poor weapon against trained security personnel, but better than nothing, and moved toward the back door. If I could reach the Mercedes before the second man found it, too late. I heard his voice outside the back door. "Senator, I found a vehicle. Silver Mercedes, vintage model. Registration matches Winter's." And then Edward's voice, instantly recognizable from countless political speeches. "Good. She's here. Secure the perimeter. I'll handle this myself." I froze, trapped. The front door was being watched by one guard, the back door by another. And Edward himself was approaching. There was nowhere to run, but there was somewhere to hide. I rushed back to Emily's room, closing the door silently behind me. Dropping to my knees, I pulled up the floorboard again, removed the documents, and slid myself into the compartment beneath. It was a tight fit. The space had been designed for a child's treasures, not an adult woman, but I managed to wedge myself in, pulling the floorboard back into place above me. In the darkness of my hiding place, I heard the front door open. Footsteps entered the cabin multiple sets. Voices, muffled but distinguishable. "Search every room," Edward commanded. "She's here somewhere." Footsteps moved through the cabin, doors opening and closing. I held my breath as someone entered Emily's room, the floorboards creaking directly above my hiding place. "Please, Emily," I prayed silently to my daughter's memory.
"Keep me safe now."
"Nothing in here, Senator," a male voice reported. "Just a kid's bedroom. Looks like it hasn't been touched in years." "Keep looking," Edward snapped. "Check under the beds and the closets. She's not stupid. She'll have hidden herself well." More footsteps, more searching. I remained perfectly still, barely breathing, clutching Richard's documents and the kitchen knife to my chest. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as the search continued. Finally, Edward's voice again, frustrated. "She must have left on foot. The car is here, but she's gone. Probably saw us coming and ran into the woods. Want us to search the perimeter, sir?"
"No."
"It's too dark, and these woods go on for miles. She won't get far on foot. Post a man to watch the car. She'll have to come back for it eventually. The rest of you, back to the SUV. We'll return in the morning with proper equipment for a search." Footsteps receded.
The front door closed.
Through a small crack in the floorboard, I could see a sliver of the room, enough to confirm it was empty. Still, I waited, listening intently for any sound that might indicate someone had remained behind. Nothing. Silence. But I couldn't be sure they were truly gone. Edward might have left a man inside the cabin, waiting silently for me to emerge from hiding. I remained in my cramped compartment, muscles screaming in protest, for what seemed like hours. Finally, when I could bear it no longer, I slowly, silently pushed up on the floorboard, creating just enough space to peer out. Emily's room was empty. I listened again. Nothing but the normal sounds of the cabin at night, the soft creaking of wood, the gentle lapping of lake water against the shore. Cautiously, I emerged from my hiding place, every muscle protesting the movement after being confined for so long. I replaced the floorboard and crept to the window, staying low. The black SUV was gone, but a figure stood beside my Mercedes, one of Edward's men, left behind to watch the car. I was trapped. I couldn't leave without the car, but I couldn't reach the car without being seen. And come morning, Edward would return with proper equipment, which likely meant more men, possibly dogs, and who knew what else. I needed help, and I needed it now. But how? My phone still showed no service. The cabin had no landline. I was cut off from the outside world, with a guard watching my only means of escape. And then I remembered the Hendersons, our neighbors at the lake, half a mile down the shore. Walter and June Henderson, an elderly couple who spent every summer at their cabin. We'd been friendly with them years ago, before Emily's death. Walter had been a retired police officer, and June had taught at the local elementary school. They had a landline. June had insisted on it, not trusting cell phones. And Walter, with his law enforcement background, might even have a gun. If they were still there.
If they still remembered me.
If their phones still worked. A lot of ifs, but it was my only chance. I couldn't risk the road. Edward's man would see me. But I could reach the Hendersons by following the lakeshore. It would be difficult in the dark, but not impossible. I gathered the documents, securing them inside my shirt. I kept the kitchen knife. Useless against a gun, but better than nothing if I encountered wildlife in the woods. Then I slipped out the back door, staying low and moving quietly toward the lake. The night was clear, the moon providing just enough light to see by. I kept to the shoreline, where the sand and pebbles made for quieter walking than the leaf-strewn forest floor. The journey was harder than I'd anticipated, rocks slippery with lake water, fallen trees to climb over, patches of brambles to navigate around. My city-soft body protested every step, but I pushed on, driven by the knowledge that my life depended on reaching the Hendersons. After what seemed like hours, I spotted lights through the trees, the Hendersons' cabin. Relief flooded through me. They were there. Or at least someone was. I approached cautiously. The cabin looked different than I remembered. It had been expanded, a new deck added facing the lake. A car I didn't recognize sat in the driveway. What if the Hendersons had sold their place? What if I was about to knock on a stranger's door in the middle of the night? But I had no choice. Edward would return at dawn, and I needed help before then. I made my way to the front door and knocked, softly at first, then more insistently when there was no immediate response. Finally, a light came on inside and a man's voice called out, "Who's there?" Not Walter's voice. This was younger, with a slight southern accent. "My name is Eleanor Winters," I called back, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm in trouble. I need help." Silence. Then the sound of a lock turning, and the door opened a crack, secured by a chain. A man's face appeared in the gap, mid-30s, with a beard and suspicious eyes. "Lady, do you know what time it is?" "I'm sorry to disturb you," I said quickly. "I'm looking for Walter and June Henderson. They were neighbors of mine years ago." The man's expression softened slightly. "The Hendersons? They sold this place to my parents 5 years ago. Mom and Dad are in Florida right now. I'm just up here closing the place for winter." My heart sank. "Please," I said, desperation creeping into my voice. "I need to use a phone. It's an emergency. My brother-in-law is trying to kill me." He stared at me for a long moment, clearly trying to decide if I was crazy or genuinely in danger. Finally, something in my expression must have convinced him. "Hang on," he said, closing the door to undo the chain. When he reopened it, I saw he was holding a baseball bat. "Come in, but stay where I can see you." The phone's on the wall in the kitchen. I stepped inside gratefully. The cabin's interior had been remodeled as well, the rustic charm of the Hendersons' day replaced with modern furnishings and sleek appliances. The man gestured toward a landline phone mounted on the kitchen wall. "Thank you," I said sincerely. "You have no idea what this means." He nodded, keeping a wary distance, the bat still in hand. "Make your call. But if this is some kind of scam..." "It's not," I assured him, moving to the phone. "I promise." I dialed Franklin's cell number, praying he would answer at. I checked the clock on the wall, 2:17 in the morning. To my immense relief, he picked up on the second ring. "Franklin Morris." "Franklin, it's Eleanor." My voice broke with emotion. "I need help. Eleanor." "Thank God." Franklin sounded wide awake, urgent. "Where are you? Everyone's looking for you." "I'm at Lake Evergreen. Our old cabin. Edward found me. He came with men, but I hid. They're coming back at dawn." "Are you safe right now?" "Temporarily. I'm at a neighbor's." I glanced at my reluctant host, who was watching me intently. "But I can't stay here. Edward has a man watching my car." "Listen carefully," Franklin said, his voice dropping to a serious tone. "The FBI wants to bring you in. They've seen the evidence Melissa provided, and they're building a case against Edward. But they need your testimony and whatever other evidence you have. I have it. Richard's journal, his letter, financial records, everything.
Good.
Now, I'm going to give you a number. Call it directly after we hang up. It's Special Agent Rebecca Torres. She's leading the investigation. Tell her exactly where you are. She can have agents to you within the hour. He gave me the number, which I repeated back to confirm. Franklin, I said, my voice trembling. Is this really happening? Edward, a United States Senator, trying to kill his own brother? It's real, Eleanor. And it goes deeper than you know. The money laundering wasn't just for personal enrichment. Edward was funneling funds to a radical political group planning to disrupt the upcoming election. Richard discovered it and was gathering evidence to expose him. The pieces clicked into place. Edward's presidential ambitions. The sudden urgency to silence Richard. The elaborate plot involving Vivian, Margot, and James. Be careful, Eleanor, Franklin continued. Edward is desperate. The FBI is closing in, and he knows it. That makes him extremely dangerous. I understand. I glanced at my host, who was looking increasingly concerned. I'll call Agent Torres now.
Good.
And Eleanor? I'm so sorry about all of this. I should have protected you better. You did what you could, Franklin. Thank you. I hung up and immediately dialed the number Franklin had given me. Agent Torres answered promptly, her voice crisp and professional. I explained my situation and location. Stay exactly where you are, Mrs. Winters, she instructed. I'm dispatching agents to your location now. They should arrive within 45 minutes. Do not attempt to return to your cabin or retrieve your car. Edward Winters may have more men in the area than the one you observed. I understand, I said, relief washing over me. Help was coming. I might actually survive this nightmare. After I hung up, my host, who introduced himself as Daniel Parker, lowered the baseball bat. So, your brother-in-law is really trying to kill you? Yes, I said simply. He's a United States Senator, and he's involved in money laundering, corruption, and murder, including my husband's. Daniel's eyes widened. Holy shit. And I almost didn't answer the door. Despite everything, I laughed, a small, borderline hysterical sound. I'm glad you did. You may have saved my life. The FBI is really coming here? He looked around his cabin as if seeing it through new eyes. Should I make coffee or something? That would be wonderful, actually. I suddenly realized how exhausted and thirsty I was. If it's not too much trouble. As Daniel busied himself with the coffee maker, I sank into a chair at the kitchen table, the weight of the past days catching up with me. I was safe, or would be, once the FBI arrived. Edward's schemes would be exposed. Richard's murder would be avenged. Justice would be served. And yet, the cost had been so high. My husband, dead. My home, temporarily lost. My dignity, stripped away during those 2 months living in my car. My trust, shattered by Margot's betrayal. Nothing would ever be the same again. Daniel placed a steaming mug of coffee in front of me, along with a plate of cookies. Oreos, he said apologetically. It's all I've got. It's perfect, I assured him, suddenly ravenous. Thank you, Daniel, for everything. He sat across from me, his own mug in hand. So, you want to tell me about it? Might help pass the time until the feds arrive. And so I did. I told him everything. Richard's death, Vivian's appearance, my exile to my car, the will reading, the confrontation with Margot, James, and Vivian, and finally, the discovery of Edward's involvement. Daniel listened without interrupting, his expression growing increasingly incredulous. That's like something out of a movie, he said when I finished. Or one of those daytime soap operas my mom watches. I smiled wryly. I know. I can hardly believe it myself, and I lived it. What will you do now, after all this is over? It was a question I hadn't allowed myself to consider. What would I do? Return to the penthouse, with all its painful memories? Revive the charitable foundation I'd run through Richard's company? Start over somewhere new? I don't know, I admitted. I haven't thought that far ahead. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. My mom always says that sometimes life is to burn to the ground before something new can grow. Wise words. I was about to respond when headlights swept across the front window. Daniel tensed, reaching for his bat again. Could be the FBI, I said, though my heart rate accelerated. Agent Torres said 45 minutes. It's been about that long. Daniel moved to the window, peering out cautiously. Black SUVs. 3 of them. Men in suits and tactical vests. Relief flooded through me. That's them. A firm knock at the door confirmed it. FBI. Mrs. Winters? Are you in there? Daniel opened the door to reveal a woman in her 40s, dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. FBI vest over a suit, badge held out for inspection. Agent Rebecca Torres. Mrs. Winters? I stood, legs suddenly shaky.
Yes.
Thank you for coming. Torres nodded briskly. We need to move quickly. My team has already secured the perimeter, but we've detected movement in the woods. Edward's men may be regrouping. The documents, I said urgently. They're still in the cabin, hidden under a floorboard in my daughter's old room. We'll retrieve them, but first, we need to get you to safety. She turned to Daniel. Sir, I apologize for the intrusion. We'll need to use your cabin as a staging area temporarily. A team will remain here for your protection. Daniel looked overwhelmed, but nodded. Of course, whatever you need. Torres guided me outside, where several agents in tactical gear stood guard. She led me to the middle SUV, opening the rear door. We'll take you directly to a safe house. Once there, you can provide a full statement. I was about to climb in when a shout came from one of the agents near the tree line. Movement. 10 o'clock. Torres's hand went to her weapon. Get in now. Before I could move, the night exploded in gunfire. I was shoved roughly into the SUV, Torres diving in after me. Go, 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 she shouted to the driver. The vehicle lurched forward, tires spinning on the gravel. Through the rear window, I saw muzzle flashes in the darkness, heard the sharp reports of weapons fire. FBI agents returned fire, taking cover behind vehicles and trees. What's happening? I gasped, huddled on the floor of the SUV. Ambush, Torres said grimly, speaking into her radio. Team 2, provide cover fire. Team 3, flanking maneuver through the woods. Secure the civilian in the cabin. More gunfire, more shouting. The SUV swerved violently, throwing me against the door. Senator's men were waiting. The driver called back. They've blocked the main road. Torres swore under her breath. Take the fire road. North side of the property. The SUV veered off the driveway onto a narrow dirt track, branches scraping against the windows. I clung to the seat, terrified and disoriented. This couldn't be happening. A United States senator ordering an armed attack on FBI agents? It was unthinkable, and yet it was happening. Edward had crossed the final line. There was no going back now. We bounced along the fire road, headlights illuminating a rough path ahead. Behind us, the sounds of gunfire grew fainter. We were escaping. We were going to make it. And then disaster. A fallen tree blocked the road ahead, too large to drive around in the dense forest. The driver slammed on the brakes, bringing us to a jarring halt. It's a trap, Torres realized, drawing her weapon. They knew we'd take this route. Driver, reverse now. Too late. Headlights appeared behind us, another vehicle blocking our retreat. We were boxed in. Mrs. Winters, Torres said urgently, when I say run, you run. Straight into the woods, heading downhill. You'll reach the lake. Follow the shore north. There's a ranger station about 2 miles up. They'll have a radio. But what about? No time to argue. My job is to keep you alive to testify.
She handed me a small flashlight.
Only use this if absolutely necessary. Stay low, stay quiet, and keep moving. The vehicle behind us was approaching slowly. In the side mirror, I could see it was another black SUV, similar to ours. Men with rifles emerged from the trees on either side of us. On my mark, Torres said, checking her weapon. She spoke to the driver. When I engage, you provide covering fire. The driver nodded grimly, drawing his own sidearm. Torres counted down softly. 3, 2, 1 now. She flung open the door, firing in quick succession at the men approaching from the right. The driver did the same on the left. Run! Torres shouted at me.
Now!
I didn't hesitate. I bolted from the SUV into the darkness of the forest, running blindly downhill as instructed. Behind me, gunfire erupted in earnest, short, controlled bursts from Torres and the driver, longer, wilder volleys from Edward's men. I ran until my lungs burned, stumbling over roots and rocks, branches whipping at my face. The sounds of the gunfight receded, replaced by the normal noises of the nighttime forest. Had I lost them? Or were they pursuing me even now, silent and deadly in the darkness? I didn't dare use the flashlight. Instead, I felt my way forward, hands extended to avoid trees, feet testing each step on the uneven ground. Eventually, the terrain leveled out, and I felt wet sand beneath my shoes. The lake. I'd reached the shore. Following Torres's instructions, I turned north, moving as quickly and quietly as I could along the waterline. The moon provided just enough light to see a few feet ahead. 2 miles to the ranger station. At my current pace, that would take at least an hour, maybe more. I had gone perhaps half a mile when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of a twig snapping behind me. Someone was following. I froze, listening intently. Nothing but the gentle lapping of waves against the shore. Had I imagined it? Then a voice, low and menacing. I know you're there, Eleanor. No point in running anymore. Edward. Not one of his men, but Edward himself. It's over, Eleanor, he continued, closer now. The FBI team is dead or captured. No one's coming to save you. I didn't believe him, couldn't believe him. The FBI wouldn't fall so easily. Torres was too competent, too prepared. But if that were true, why was Edward himself pursuing me through the dark woods? I don't want to hurt you, he called, his voice the same smooth, persuasive tone he used in campaign speeches. Your family. Richard would want me to protect you. A bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. The sound gave away my position. There you are, Edward said, satisfaction in his voice. A beam of light cut through the darkness, sweeping the shoreline. The flashlight beam caught me briefly before I ducked behind a tree. I see you, Eleanor. This cat-and-mouse game is pointless. I pressed myself against the trunk of the large pine, heart hammering. I could hear his footsteps now, crunching on the pebbly shore, coming closer. You know, I admired Richard, Edward continued conversationally, as if we were chatting at a family dinner. He built something impressive from nothing, but he was always so moral, so rigid in his principles. He couldn't see the bigger picture. I remained silent, mind racing. The ranger station was still at least a mile and a half away. I'd never make it with Edward this close behind. I needed another plan. The money wasn't for me, Eleanor. Not primarily. It was for the cause. A movement that will reshape this country, return it to its former glory. Richard discovered it and threatened to expose everything. I tried to reason with him, but he wouldn't listen. The footsteps stopped. He was close, perhaps 20 feet away. I held my breath. I didn't want him to die, Edward said, his voice dropping to something almost regretful. I just wanted him silenced until after the election. But James panicked, took matters into his own hands. Liar, I whispered, though not loud enough for him to hear. The email Melissa had shown me was clear. Edward had ordered Richard's death. Come out, Eleanor. I promise you'll be treated well. A comfortable facility, the best care. A place where you can live out your days in peace, away from the stresses of the world. A mental institution. That was his plan. Not to kill me outright, but to discredit me, declare me insane, lock me away where no one would believe a word I said against him. If you don't come out, his voice hardened, I can't guarantee your safety. My men are less surgical than I am.
Men.
Plural. So he wasn't alone. How many were with him? Where were they positioned? The flashlight beam swept past my tree again, probing the darkness. I had to move. Staying in one place would only make it easier for them to find me. Crouching low, I slipped from behind the tree to a boulder a few feet away. From there, I could see Edward's silhouette against the moonlit lake, tall, distinguished, a gun in one hand, flashlight in the other. I couldn't see anyone else, but that didn't mean they weren't there. I needed to circle back. The ranger station was too far, too obvious. But the cabin, my cabin, might offer sanctuary. Edward thought I was running away from it. He wouldn't expect me to double back. Moving silently from cover to cover, I began making my way inland, away from the shore and Edward's searching flashlight. The forest was darker here, the trees blocking the moonlight, but that worked in my favor. If I couldn't see, neither could they. I had gone perhaps 100 yards when a new sound reached me. A helicopter, its rotors beating the air in the distance, but growing louder. Reinforcements? But for which side? Edward heard it too. Damn it, I heard him curse. Then, louder, to someone I couldn't see. We need to finish this now. Find her. The helicopter sound grew louder, and suddenly the forest was bathed in harsh, white light from above. A spotlight, sweeping the trees. Through gaps in the canopy, I caught glimpses of the aircraft, black, unmarked, but with a distinctive profile I recognized from news footage.
FBI.
Help had arrived after all. Edward must have realized it too. Fall back, he shouted. To the vehicles.
Now.
Footsteps crashed through the underbrush as Edward and his men retreated. The helicopter circled lower, its spotlight systematically searching the forest. A voice boomed from a loudspeaker. This is the FBI. Edward Winters. You are surrounded. Throw down your weapons and surrender. Gunfire erupted. Edward's men shooting at the helicopter. The aircraft veered sharply, its spotlight still searching the ground. I couldn't tell if they'd seen me yet. I had a choice to make. Stay hidden and wait for the FBI to find me, or make myself visible and risk being spotted by Edward or his men first. Before I could decide, a hand clamped over my mouth from behind. I tried to scream, to struggle, but an arm like iron wrapped around my waist, immobilizing me. Quiet, a voice hissed in my ear. It's me, Agent Torres. We need to move. The hand released my mouth, and I turned to see Torres, bloodied but alive, her FBI vest gone, weapon drawn. You're alive, I gasped. Edward said. Edward lies, she said grimly. Most of my team made it. We've been tracking you since you ran. Come on, we need to reach the extraction point. She led me deeper into the forest, away from both the helicopter and the sounds of Edward's retreat. We moved quickly but carefully, Torres constantly scanning our surroundings. Where are we going? I whispered. Your cabin. There's an FBI tactical team securing it as we speak. From there, we'll get you to the safe house. The evidence. Already recovered, along with something else. Something we didn't expect to find. Before I could ask what she meant, Torres held up a hand, signaling for silence. We froze. Footsteps approached from our right. Heavy, deliberate. Agent Torres, Edward's voice called out, unnervingly close. I know you have Eleanor. Let's be reasonable about this. Torres pushed me behind her, raising her weapon. Senator Winters, she called back. You're under arrest for money laundering, conspiracy, and the murder of Richard Winters. Drop your weapon and surrender. Edward's laugh floated through the darkness. You're outnumbered, Agent. My men have your team surrounded. This doesn't have to end in bloodshed. You're lying, Senator. Your men are being rounded up as we speak. The FBI has the lake house surrounded. There's no escape. A long silence. Then Edward's voice, closer now. Perhaps. But I can still ensure Eleanor never testifies. A gunshot split the night. Torres staggered, clutching her shoulder. Run, she gasped, shoving me away. Get to the cabin. Go. I hesitated, unwilling to leave her wounded. Go, she insisted, raising her weapon with her uninjured arm. I'll hold him off. Another shot, another miss. Torres returned fire, the muzzle flash briefly illuminating the forest around us. I turned and ran, guilt and fear propelling me forward. Behind me, more gunshots echoed through the trees. I ran blindly, no longer caring about noise, focused only on reaching the cabin and the safety it promised. The forest seemed to go on forever, trees and shadows blending together in the darkness. Was I even going the right way? Finally, mercifully, I broke through the tree line into the clearing around my cabin. Lights blazed from every window. Black SUVs with FBI markings surrounded the property. Agents in tactical gear patrolled the perimeter. "Help!" I shouted, stumbling toward them. "Agent Torres is shot. Back there, in the woods." Several agents rushed toward me while others moved into the forest, weapons ready. I was guided, half-carried, into the cabin where more agents waited. "Mrs. Winters," a tall man in a suit greeted me. "I'm Special Agent in charge William Hargrove. You're safe now." "Agent Torres," I gasped. "Edward shot her. She's still out there. We have teams searching. If she's there, we'll find her." He guided me to a chair. "Are you injured?" I shook my head, though my entire body ached from the ordeal. "Just exhausted." "What's happening? Did you catch Edward?" "Not yet, but we will. His political career is over regardless. We have enough evidence to convict him on multiple felony counts." Hargrove's expression was grim, but satisfied. "The documents you secured were the final pieces we needed. Torres said you found something else here. Something unexpected." Hargrove nodded.
Yes.
"In the master bedroom, a woman, unconscious but alive. We believe she's been drugged." My mind struggled to process his words. "A woman? Here? That's impossible. No one has been in this cabin for 20 years except me, and I only arrived yesterday. Nevertheless, she's here. And according to her ID, her name is Vivian Lane."
Vivian?
Here? It made no sense. Vivian had been arrested along with Margot and James. She should be in custody, not unconscious in my lake house. "I need to see her," I said, rising unsteadily to my feet. Hargrove looked uncertain. "Mrs. Winters, she's being treated by paramedics. And you've been through a tremendous ordeal yourself." "Please," I insisted. "This woman was my husband's mistress. She was part of the conspiracy that killed him. I need to see her." After a moment's hesitation, Hargrove nodded. "All right, but briefly." He led me to the master bedroom, where two paramedics worked over a figure on the bed. As we entered, they stepped back, allowing me to see. It was Vivian, but not as I remembered her. Her face was bruised, her designer clothes replaced by a simple hospital gown. And 4 drip ran into her arm, and a heart monitor beeped steadily beside the bed. "What happened to her?" I asked, shocked by her condition. "We're not sure yet," Hargrove replied. "The medical examiner believes she's been kept sedated for days. There are needle marks on her arms consistent with regular injections." Days? But that was impossible. Vivian had been at the will reading just 2 days ago. She'd been arrested at my penthouse yesterday. "Unless that's not possible," I said slowly. "I saw her yesterday, at my penthouse. She was there with Margot and James when they tried to force me to sign those documents." Hargrove frowned. "Mrs. Winters, according to our records, Vivian Lane has been missing for over a week. She never appeared for questioning after we began investigating your husband's company." "But I saw her," I protested. "We all did. Franklin, James, Margot, everyone." Franklin Morris has already provided a statement. He described a woman matching Vivian Lane's general appearance, but he'd never met her before. He was relying on your identification. My mind reeled. If that wasn't Vivian at my penthouse, then who? As if in answer to my unspoken question, Vivian's eyes fluttered open. She looked around, disoriented, before her gaze settled on me. Recognition dawned in her eyes, followed by confusion. "Eleanor," she whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. Where am I?" "You're safe," I said automatically, though I was still struggling to make sense of the situation. "You're at my cabin. The FBI found you here." "Cabin?" She frowned, trying to sit up before the paramedics gently restrained her.
No.
"I was at the penthouse. With Richard." He was going to tell you everything about Edward, about the money laundering. But then, her eyes widened in sudden horror. Oh God. Richard. They killed him, didn't they? Yes, I confirmed, moving closer to the bed. Who killed him, Vivian? Who did this to you? Edward, she whispered. And his assistant. The woman. She looks like me. They made her look like me. The woman. The fake Vivian who had evicted me from my home. Who had tormented me for 2 months. Who had been part of the confrontation at my penthouse. What's her name, Vivian? The woman who impersonated you. Vivian's eyes began to close as the sedatives in her system pulled her back toward unconsciousness. Alexis, she murmured. Alexis. Winters. The name hit me like a physical blow. Winters. Edward's daughter. My niece by marriage. A young woman I'd met only a handful of times at family functions, who had always seemed so quiet, so unremarkable, so perfect for the role of femme fatale in her father's elaborate scheme. As Vivian slipped back into unconsciousness, Hargrove touched my arm. Mrs. Winters?
Are you all right?
I turned to him, my mind racing to reassemble the pieces of this twisted puzzle. Alexis Winters. Edward's daughter. She's the one who pretended to be Vivian. The one who evicted me from my home. The real Vivian must have been working with Richard to expose Edward's crimes, and they kidnapped her, replaced her with Alexis. Hargrove nodded grimly. We'll need to update the APB. If Alexis Winters is impersonating Vivian Lane, she could still be in custody under the wrong identity. Or she could have escaped, I realized with growing horror. If she convinced everyone she was Vivian, they might not have been as careful with her as they should have been. I'll make the call. Hargrove stepped away, speaking urgently into his radio. I remained by Vivian's bedside, watching her pale face, so vulnerable in sleep. The woman I had hated for months, blamed for destroying my marriage, for taking my home, for contributing to Richard's death. She might have been innocent all along. Perhaps even another victim like me. The real villain had been Alexis Winters, Edward's devoted daughter, playing the role of the mistress, while the real Vivian was held captive. It was almost too twisted to believe. And yet it made a terrible kind of sense. Who better to seduce Richard than a young woman who had studied him for years as her father's brother? Who knew his tastes, his weaknesses, his routines? Who could gain access to his office, his home, his accounts without raising suspicion? My thoughts were interrupted by a commotion outside. Raised voices, hurried footsteps. Something was happening. I moved to the bedroom door just as Hargrove returned, his expression grave. We have a situation, Mrs. Winters. There's been an incident at the local police station where we were processing the suspects from your penthouse. What kind of incident? A breakout. Someone claiming to be Vivian Lane escaped custody, killing 2 guards in the process. Alexis. It had to be. And Edward? Still at large. But we've received reports of a helicopter landing at a private airstrip 20 miles from here. We have teams en route, but he didn't need to finish the sentence. Edward was escaping, and if he reached that helicopter, he might get away entirely. What about Agent Torres? I asked, suddenly remembering the wounded agent who had saved my life in the forest. Hargrove's expression softened slightly. Found her about 10 minutes ago. Gunshot wound to the shoulder. But she'll make it. She's being airlifted to the hospital as we speak. Relief washed over me. At least Torres had survived. At least something had gone right in this nightmare. Mrs. Winters, Hargrove continued, we need to move you to a secure location immediately. If Alexis Winters has escaped and is linking up with her father. I nodded, understanding the danger. I'm ready, but what about her? I nodded toward Vivian's unconscious form. Medical transport is on the way. She'll be taken to a secure hospital facility under guard. He gestured toward the door. Now, we really need to go. As we exited the bedroom, a young agent rushed up to Hargrove. Sir, urgent message from Team Bravo. They've reached the airstrip, but the helicopter is already airborne. 2 occupants, believed to be Edward Winters and a female matching Alexis Winters' description. Hargrove swore under his breath. Flight plan? Destination? None filed, sir. They're headed southeast toward the coast. Alert the Coast Guard. And get me air support. I want that helicopter tracked. Hargrove turned to me. Mrs. Winters, I'm afraid the situation has escalated. We need to get you to the safe house now. I followed him outside, where a convoy of FBI vehicles waited. As agents guided me toward the lead SUV, I looked back at my cabin one last time. The place that had once held such happy memories, now forever tainted by violence and betrayal. Edward had escaped, with his daughter Alexis by his side. The real Vivian Lane lay unconscious inside, another victim of their elaborate scheme. And somewhere out there, the woman I had thought was Vivian, the woman who had thrown me out of my home, who had taunted me while I lived in my car, was actually my niece, a cold-blooded killer who had helped orchestrate my husband's murder. The nightmare wasn't over. It had only entered a new, more dangerous phase. As the SUV pulled away from the cabin, I felt a strange calmness settle over me. For 2 months, I had been a victim, homeless, powerless, at the mercy of forces I didn't understand. But now I knew the truth. I had evidence. I had allies. And I had a purpose: to see Edward and Alexis Winters brought to justice, no matter what it took, no matter how long. Richard would have wanted nothing less. The safe house turned out to be a sprawling farmhouse on 100 acres of government-owned land, surrounded by an electrified fence and patrolled by armed guards. From the outside, it looked like a quaint country estate. Inside, it was a fortress, bulletproof windows, reinforced doors, and a communication center that would have made the Pentagon proud. I was given a bedroom on the second floor with a view of rolling fields and distant mountains. Beautiful and isolated. Perfect for protection. Perfect for making someone disappear. You'll be comfortable here, Mrs. Winters, Agent Hargrove assured me as a female agent showed me the room. We have everything you need, and you'll be completely safe. For how long? I asked, setting down the small bag of essentials the FBI had provided: toiletries, a change of clothes, basic necessities. Until we apprehend Edward and Alexis Winters. Or until the trial, whichever comes first. And if you never catch them? I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. Do I stay here forever? A prisoner while they roam free? Hargrove's expression softened. We'll catch them, Mrs. Winters. Edward may have money and connections, but he's not invisible, especially now that we know what we're looking for. I wasn't convinced. Edward had been planning this for years, meticulously constructing his scheme, layer by layer. The fake affair with a Vivian impersonator, the money laundering disguised as legitimate business, the elimination of anyone who threatened to expose him, including his own brother. He wouldn't have failed to prepare an escape route, complete with new identities and offshore accounts. Get some rest, Hargrove suggested. Tomorrow, we'll need to take your full statement. Every detail you can remember from the beginning. After he left, I sat on the edge of the bed, exhaustion settling into my bones. The past few days had been a whirlwind of revelations and dangers, each more shocking than the last. My mind kept returning to the image of Vivian, the real Vivian, lying unconscious in my cabin, a victim rather than a villain. And to Alexis, Edward's daughter, who had played the role of homewrecker with such convincing malice. I had been wrong about everything. Richard hadn't betrayed me with a younger woman. He had discovered his brother's crimes and was working to expose them, possibly with the real Vivian's help. Instead of confronting me with his discoveries, he had tried to protect me, a decision that ultimately cost him his life and nearly cost me mine. Sleep eluded me that night. I tossed and turned, haunted by nightmares when I did drift off. Edward pursuing me through endless dark woods, Alexis standing over me with a triumphant smile, Richard calling out warnings I couldn't quite hear. At dawn, I gave up trying to sleep and went downstairs to find several agents already awake, monitoring communications and surveillance feeds. They offered me coffee and breakfast, which I accepted gratefully. Any news? I asked one of them, a young woman who introduced herself as Agent Chen. Nothing concrete, she replied, her expression carefully neutral. But we have leads. The helicopter was tracked to a private airstrip near the coast, where we believe Senator Winters and his daughter boarded a private jet. Where were they headed? We're not sure yet. The flight plan indicated the Cayman Islands, but that could have been misdirection. A haven for offshore accounts and banking secrecy. It made sense Edward would head there first, to access the money he'd been laundering for years. What about the real Vivian Lane? Is she awake? Has she said anything more? Agent Chun hesitated. I'm not authorized to share details of the ongoing investigation, Mrs. Winters.
I'm sorry.
Of course. I was just a witness, not part of the investigation team. Despite everything I'd been through, despite being the widow of the man they'd murdered, I was being kept in the dark. Agent Hargrove arrived an hour later with a team that included a stenographer and a Justice Department lawyer. They set up in the farmhouse's dining room, arranging recording equipment and files on the large oak table. Mrs. Winters, Hargrove began formally once we were all seated. We need your complete statement regarding the events surrounding your husband's death, your subsequent eviction from your home, and the conspiracy involving Edward Winters, James Wilson, Margot Landry, and the woman who impersonated Vivian Lane, now identified as Alexis Winters. Please start from the beginning and include every detail you can remember, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant. And so I did. For hours, I recounted everything, finding Richard dead, Alexis, who I had believed was Vivian, appearing at my door, being forced out of my home, living in my car, the will reading, the confrontation at the penthouse, discovering Edward's involvement, fleeing to the lake house, the attack by Edward and his men, and finally, the revelation about the real Vivian and Alexis's impersonation. The stenographer's fingers flew across her keyboard, capturing every word. Hargrove and the Justice Department lawyer, a stern woman named Patricia Alvarez, interrupted occasionally to ask for clarification or additional details. By the time I finished, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the farmhouse's wooden floors. Thank you, Mrs. Winters, Alvarez said when I finally fell silent. Your testimony, combined with the physical evidence and the statements from Franklin Morris and the real Vivian Lane, builds a compelling case against Edward and Alexis Winters, as well as their co-conspirators. What happens now? I asked, my throat raw from hours of talking. We continue the search for Edward and Alexis, Hargrove replied. Meanwhile, we're building the case. James Wilson and Margot Landry are already in custody and facing charges of conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, money laundering, and a host of other crimes. They're both looking at life in prison. And Edward? Alexis? The same charges, plus additional counts for Edward related to his position as a senator. Corruption, abuse of power, obstruction of justice. When we catch them, and we will catch them, they'll never see the outside of a prison again. I should have felt satisfaction at this. Instead, I felt hollow. Edward and Alexis were still free, possibly beyond the reach of American justice. Richard was still dead, and I was still here, in protective custody, my life on hold. There's something else you should know, Alvarez said, exchanging a glance with Hargrove. The real Vivian Lane has regained consciousness and provided her statement. Her account corroborates much of what we already suspected, but adds significant details. Such as? I prompted when she paused. According to Ms. Lane, she never had a romantic relationship with your husband. She was an undercover journalist investigating Edward Winters' connections to extremist political groups. She approached Richard after discovering suspicious transactions linked to his company, believing he might be involved. Instead, she found a potential ally. Richard was already suspicious of his brother and his own business partner, James Wilson. He and Ms. Lane began working together to gather evidence. I stared at her, trying to process this new information. So there was never an affair? Richard never betrayed me. According to Ms. Lane, no. In fact, she says Richard spoke of you often, with great love and respect. He was determined to protect you from the fallout when the story broke. Tears welled in my eyes, a mixture of relief and renewed grief. Richard had been faithful. He had loved me until the end. And I had doubted him, even if only briefly. When did Alexis enter the picture? I asked, wiping away tears. About 7 years ago, according to Ms. Lane's timeline. Edward noticed Vivian asking questions, getting close to Richard. He had his daughter study Vivian, her mannerisms, her speech patterns, her style, and then introduced her to Richard at a charity event, posing as Vivian Lane. The real Vivian was abducted shortly thereafter and kept sedated in various locations while Alexis took her place, gaining Richard's trust and access to his business. But why not just kill Vivian? The question was harsh, but necessary. Why keep her alive all these years? Insurance, Hargrove answered grimly. If anything went wrong with the plan, they could produce the real Vivian, claim she had been the one having an affair with Richard all along, and shift blame to her. Also, they needed her alive to maintain the impersonation, access to her accounts, her background information, her contacts. It was chillingly logical in a twisted way. Edward had thought of everything. Ms. Lane believes she was moved to your lake cabin only recently, Alvarez continued. After you fled the penthouse, and the FBI began closing in. Edward needed her somewhere isolated, where she could be eliminated if necessary, and her body hidden. And instead, we found her, I said, feeling a grim satisfaction at this one failure in Edward's perfect plan.
Yes.
It may be the break we needed. Ms. Lane had information even Richard wasn't aware of, specific bank accounts, meeting locations, names of Edward's co-conspirators beyond James Wilson and Margot Landry. More people were involved? Hargrove nodded. At least 3 other senators, a federal judge, and several high-ranking business leaders. The conspiracy goes deeper than we initially thought. Edward wasn't just laundering money for personal gain. He was financing a shadow campaign to undermine the upcoming election, to install loyalists in key positions throughout the government. A coup, not with guns and soldiers, but with money and influence. The enormity of it was staggering. This is bigger than just bringing Edward to justice for Richard's murder, isn't it? I said slowly. Much bigger, Alvarez confirmed. Which is why your continued cooperation and protection are so vital, Mrs. Winters. Your testimony, combined with Ms. Lane's evidence, could help us dismantle an entire network of corruption. I nodded, suddenly understanding my new role in this unfolding drama. I was no longer just Richard's widow seeking justice. I was a key witness in what could be the most significant political corruption case in decades. The days at the safe house blended together. I gave additional statements, reviewed documents, identified photographs of people connected to Edward's network. Agents came and went, always with updates too vague to be satisfying. We've frozen more accounts linked to Senator Winters. Another co-conspirator has been arrested. We're narrowing down possible locations for the fugitives. But never. We've found Edward and Alexis. 2 weeks into my stay, I received an unexpected visitor, Franklin Morris, looking tired but determined. Eleanor, he said warmly, embracing me. You look well, considering the circumstances. Franklin, what are you doing here? I thought visitors weren't allowed. Special permission. I have information regarding Richard's estate that couldn't wait. We sat in the farmhouse's small library, a cozy room with bookshelves lining the walls and a view of the surrounding countryside. The courts have expedited the probate process, given the extraordinary circumstances, Franklin explained. Richard's assets have been released from the freeze order. You have access to your accounts again, your properties, everything. It should have been welcome news. After months of living in my car, of selling my jewelry piece by piece to survive, I was wealthy again. But it felt hollow. What good does it do me here? I gestured at the safe house. I'm still a prisoner, just in a more comfortable cage. Franklin's expression softened. I understand your frustration, Eleanor. But the protection is necessary. Edward and Alexis are still at large, and they've proven they're willing to kill to protect themselves. Have there been any sightings? Any leads? Nothing concrete. The last confirmed report placed them in the Cayman Islands, but that was over a week ago. They could be anywhere by now. I nodded, unsurprised. Edward had been planning this for years. He would have multiple escape routes, multiple identities, multiple hiding places. There's something else, Franklin said, his tone changing. Something I discovered in Richard's personal files, something he didn't share with the FBI or even with Vivian Lane. My attention sharpened. What is it? Franklin reached into his briefcase and withdrew a small, weathered journal. Not Richard's business journal that I'd found in the safe, but an older, more personal one. This dates back 20 years, he explained, handing it to me. Around the time Emily died. Emily, our daughter. Just the mention of her name still caused a pang in my heart, even after all these years. What does Emily have to do with any of this? I asked, confused. Read the entry from September 12th, the day after her funeral. I opened the journal with trembling hands, finding the date Franklin had indicated. Richard's handwriting, usually so precise, was shaky here, the words written in clear distress. I can never tell Eleanor. It would destroy her completely, after losing Emily. But I know the truth now. Edward was responsible. The experimental treatment he recommended, the doctor he insisted was the best in the field, it was all part of his plan. The treatment wasn't meant to cure Emily's leukemia. It was designed to accelerate it, to ensure she wouldn't survive. I found the evidence in the doctor's own records, payments from Edward's foundation, correspondence discussing the subject and the expected outcome. My brother killed my daughter to get to me, to weaken me before making his move on the company. I will never forgive. I will never forget. And someday, he will pay for what he's done. The journal fell from my numb fingers. No, I whispered. No, it can't be true. Edward wouldn't, not Emily. She was just a child. Franklin's face was grim. I had the same reaction. I couldn't believe it, didn't want to believe it. So, I investigated. The doctor Richard mentioned, a Dr. Alexander Kessler, disappeared shortly after Emily's death. His medical license was revoked for experimental procedures without proper oversight. The official record shows he moved to South America. There's no trace of him after that. But why? Why would Edward kill his own niece? Control of Winter's investments. According to Richard's notes, Edward was deeply in debt at the time, his political career stalling. He needed money, large amounts of it, to pay off creditors and fund his next campaign. Richard owned controlling interest in the company and had refused to bail Edward out again after several previous loans went unpaid. I remembered that time vaguely. Edward visiting more frequently, hushed arguments between the brothers, tension at family gatherings. But I'd been so focused on Emily's illness, on trying to save our daughter, that I'd paid little attention to the broader family dynamics. After Emily died, Franklin continued, Richard was devastated, as were you. He withdrew from active management of the company for nearly a year. During that time, Edward and his allies, including a young James Wilson, newly hired on Edward's recommendation, began the money laundering operation. By the time Richard returned to full-time work, the scheme was well established and carefully hidden. And Richard never told me, I said, a statement rather than a question. He carried this knowledge, this burden, for 20 years. He wanted to protect you from the truth. And later, when he began gathering evidence against Edward, he feared involving you would put you in danger. He was right about that, at least. A bitter laugh escaped me. Fat lot of good it did, though. I ended up in danger anyway. Franklin nodded solemnly. Richard underestimated Edward's ruthlessness. We all did. I picked up the journal again, rereading Richard's anguished words. My daughter, my beautiful, bright, loving Emily, murdered by her own uncle for money and power. The experimental treatment we had pinned our last hopes on, that had caused her such suffering in her final weeks, had been designed to kill her all along. A cold, crystalline rage formed in my heart, harder and sharper than any emotion I'd felt before. This wasn't just about Richard anymore, or about justice for his murder. This was about Emily, my child. I need to speak with Agent Hargrove, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Immediately. Franklin looked concerned. Eleanor, what are you planning? Nothing illegal, if that's what you're worried about. I stood, tucking Richard's journal into my pocket. But I'm done hiding. It's time to draw Edward and Alexis out of their holes. Agent Hargrove was skeptical at first. A public statement? Mrs. Winters, that would reveal your location, compromise your security. Not if we control the narrative, I argued. Not if we make it work for us instead of against us. We were in the Safe House's communication center, surrounded by monitors and FBI personnel. I had shown Hargrove Richards' journal, explained my theory. Edward killed my daughter 20 years ago. He manipulated her medical treatment to ensure she wouldn't survive, all to weaken Richard and gain control of their company. That level of calculated cruelty, that willingness to murder a child, his own niece, tells you everything you need to know about the man you're hunting. Hargrove's expression had darkened as he read the journal entry. This is monstrous, if true, but it was 20 years ago. The doctor is missing, presumably dead. The evidence would be nearly impossible to verify now. I don't need to prove it in court. I just need to use it to flush Edward out of hiding. I leaned forward, intent. He's built his entire political career on his image as a family man, a defender of traditional values. What happens when his former sister-in-law goes public with evidence that he murdered his own niece for financial gain? Understanding dawned in Hargrove's eyes. He'd have to respond. Deny it, discredit you.
Exactly.
And to do that effectively, he'd need to show himself, make a public statement. We'd know where he is, at least approximately. It's risky, Hargrove said, but I could tell he was considering it. If he's smart, he'll issue a written statement through an attorney, remain in hiding. Then we escalate. I reveal more details, challenge him directly, question his courage. Edward has an ego the size of Montana. He won't be able to resist defending himself, especially against a woman he considers beneath him intellectually and socially. Patricia Alvarez, who had joined our discussion, nodded slowly. It could work. And even if it doesn't draw him out immediately, it would increase public pressure, make it harder for him to find allies or safe havens. Hargrove thought for a long moment, then nodded.
All right.
But we do this our way, with full security protocols. No live appearances. A recorded statement, released through our channels. And we don't reveal your location. Agreed, I said, feeling a surge of purpose for the first time in weeks. When do we start? Tomorrow. We'll need to prepare your statement carefully. Make sure it hits all the right notes without crossing any legal lines. That night, I couldn't sleep again, but this time it wasn't from fear or uncertainty. It was anticipation. After months of being a victim, of reacting to Edward's machinations, I was finally taking action. I was fighting back. The next morning, I sat before a camera in the Safe House's library, wearing a simple black dress Franklin had brought me, my hair and makeup done by an FBI technician to ensure I looked both dignified and sympathetic. The statement had been carefully crafted with the help of Alvarez and a Justice Department media specialist, designed to provoke Edward without seeming deliberately inflammatory. My name is Eleanor Winters. I began, looking directly into the camera. 2 months ago, my husband, Richard Winters, was murdered in our home. His death was made to look like a heart attack, but it was murder, orchestrated by his own brother, Senator Edward Winters, and carried out by co-conspirators including Edward's daughter, Alexis Winters, who posed as my husband's mistress to gain access to our home and his business. I paused, letting the shocking accusation sink in before continuing. After Richard's death, I was forced out of my home by Alexis, still posing as a woman named Vivian Lane. For 2 months, I lived in my car, believing my husband had betrayed me and left me with nothing. It was all part of Edward's plan to discredit me, to ensure that when I eventually learned the truth about his crimes, no one would believe me. Another pause. I took a sip of water, my hands steady despite the emotions churning inside me. But the truth has come to light. The real Vivian Lane, who Edward had kidnapped and held captive while his daughter impersonated her, has been found alive. Financial records proving Edward's involvement in money laundering and election interference have been secured. The co-conspirators who helped him, James Wilson and Margot Landry, are in custody and cooperating with authorities. I leaned closer to the camera, my voice dropping slightly, becoming more intimate. Now Edward and Alexis have fled the country, running from justice like the cowards they are. But there's something they don't know. Something Richard discovered but kept secret, even from the authorities, until his death. Something I recently learned from his private journals. This was the hook, the bait that would draw Edward out. I took a deep breath. 20 years ago, my daughter Emily died of leukemia. She was 17 years old, with her whole life ahead of her. Her death devastated Richard and me. We never fully recovered from the loss. What I didn't know, what Richard discovered but couldn't bear to tell me, was that Emily's death was not a natural progression of her disease. The experimental treatment Edward insisted would save her, the specialist he recommended, the clinical trial he used his influence to get her into, it was all designed to accelerate her illness, to ensure she wouldn't survive. Tears filled my eyes, genuine grief for my daughter mingling with rage at Edward's betrayal. My brother-in-law murdered my child to gain control of my husband's company. He watched us grieve, pretended to share our pain, all while knowing he had engineered her death for financial gain. This is the real Edward Winters, not the family man he portrays in campaign ads, not the champion of traditional values he claims to be in speeches. He is a man who would kill his own niece, murder his own brother, and destroy countless lives to satisfy his greed and ambition. I wiped away a tear, my voice growing stronger. Edward, if you're watching this, and I know you are, know that I am not afraid of you anymore. I will not hide. I will not be silenced. I will see justice done for Richard, for Emily, and for all the others whose lives you've destroyed. You can run, but you cannot escape the truth. And the truth, Edward, is that you are a coward and a murderer, hiding behind your money and your political connections while innocent people suffer. I stared directly into the camera, delivering the final challenge. Prove me wrong, Edward. Face me. Face justice. Or live the rest of your life as a fugitive, looking over your shoulder, knowing that every day brings us one step closer to finding you. The choice is yours. The red light on the camera blinked off. I exhaled slowly, the tension draining from my body. Perfect, Hargrove said quietly. Absolutely perfect. The statement was released that afternoon, broadcast on major news networks, shared on social media, discussed on political talk shows. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Hashtags trended. Pundits debated. Politicians from both parties called for investigations. Edward's former allies scrambled to distance themselves, issuing statements expressing shock and dismay at the allegations. And then silence. No response from Edward or his representatives. No sightings, no statements, no denials. Days passed. The story remained in the headlines, but Edward and Alexis remained ghosts. It didn't work, I said to Hargrove a week after the video's release. He's smarter than I gave him credit for. Give it time, Hargrove advised. These things don't always happen immediately. We've increased the pressure. Something will break. But nothing did. Not for another week, and then another. The media began to move on to other stories. The public's attention shifted to newer scandals. Edward and Alexis remained at large, their whereabouts unknown. A month after my video statement, I was beginning to lose hope. I sat in the safe house's library, staring out at the autumn landscape, the trees turning brilliant shades of red and gold. So much beauty in the world, and I was viewing it through bulletproof glass, a prisoner of Edward's schemes even in his absence. Agent Chin knocked softly on the open door. Mrs. Winters? There's someone here to see you. I turned, expecting Franklin or perhaps Alvarez. Instead, a tall, elegant woman with short dark hair stood in the doorway. It took me a moment to recognize her without the bruises and hospital gown. Vivian Lane, I said, rising to my feet. Eleanor Winters. She stepped into the room, her movements graceful but cautious. I hope you don't mind the visit. Agent Hargrove thought it might be therapeutic for both of us to talk. I gestured to the chair opposite mine. Please sit. Would you like some tea? That would be lovely. As I prepared the tea at the small sideboard, I studied Vivian surreptitiously. She was beautiful in a subtle way, with intelligent eyes and a quiet confidence. I could see why Richard had trusted her, why he had been willing to work with her to expose Edward's crimes. I saw your statement, she said as I handed her a cup. It was powerful.
Brave.
Not brave enough, apparently. Edward hasn't surfaced. Vivian sipped her tea thoughtfully. He will. Men like Edward can't stand to be challenged, especially by women.
He's planning something.
Plotting his response. You seem to know him well. I studied him for 2 years before approaching Richard. Edward Winters was the subject of my investigation from the beginning. His connections to extremist groups, his misuse of campaign funds, his mysterious income beyond his Senate salary. How did you get involved with Richard? I asked, the question that had been haunting me since learning the truth. Vivian set down her cup. I approached him at a fundraiser, posing as a potential donor. I had evidence that money from Winters' investments was being funneled to offshore accounts linked to domestic terror groups. I assumed Richard was involved, complicit. But during our conversation, I realized he had no idea what was happening in his own company. He was genuinely shocked by what I showed him. And you believed him? Not at first. But he insisted on investigating himself privately. He discovered James Wilson's involvement, and through him, Edward's. When he came back to me with evidence of his own, proof that he'd been kept in the dark, I knew he was telling the truth. She paused, her expression softening. He talked about you constantly, you know. How much he loved you, how he wanted to protect you from the fallout when the story broke. He was afraid Edward would retaliate against you if he knew Richard was onto him. A lump formed in my throat. He was right about that. Richard was a good man, Eleanor. One of the best I've ever known. What happened to him? To you, I feel responsible. If I hadn't involved him in my investigation, Edward would have killed him anyway. I interrupted gently. Once Richard started looking into the company finances on his own, he was a threat. You gave him context, understanding. You helped him make sense of what he was finding. Vivian nodded, blinking back tears. I just wish we'd moved faster, been more cautious. When Edward discovered our collaboration, he moved immediately. The last time I saw Richard, he was planning to tell you everything the next day. He said he couldn't keep you in the dark any longer, that you deserved to know the truth, to be prepared. He never got the chance, I said softly.
No.
That night, I was abducted from my apartment. I remember a sharp pain in my neck, an injection, and then nothing until waking up in your cabin weeks later. She shuddered at the memory. They kept me sedated, moving me from place to place. I gathered that Alexis had taken my identity, was posing as me, but I had no idea of the full extent of their plan. Did you know about Emily? I asked, the question that had been burning in my mind. About what Edward did to her? Vivian's expression turned grave. Not until after I was rescued. The FBI showed me Richard's journal, asked if I had any corroborating evidence. I didn't, not directly. But during my investigation, I had uncovered a pattern of suspicious deaths connected to Edward, political rivals who died in accidents, witnesses who disappeared, a journalist who committed suicide just before publishing an exposé on Edward's finances. Emily's death fits the pattern, though it's perhaps the most monstrous of his crimes. We sat in silence for a moment, each lost in our own thoughts about the man who had caused us both so much pain. Why are you here, Vivian? I finally asked, beyond Hargrove thinking it would be therapeutic for us to meet. She straightened, her demeanor shifting from reflective to purposeful. I have information. Something I didn't share with the FBI initially because I couldn't be certain of its reliability. But after seeing your statement, connecting the dots about Emily, I think it's genuine. My pulse quickened. What information? A source contacted me shortly before I was abducted. Someone inside Edward's operation. Someone with access to his private schedule and communications. This person reached out through encrypted channels, offering evidence of Edward's crimes in exchange for protection. We never completed the exchange. I was taken before we could meet, but the source provided one piece of information as proof of their legitimacy. Which was a property, a private island off the coast of Belize, purchased through a shell company 7 layers deep. According to my source, it's Edward's panic button, his final refuge if everything else fails. The place he would go if he had no other options. Have you told the FBI? I told Hargrove yesterday. They're verifying the information, preparing an operation. But they're moving cautiously. The island is technically outside U.S. jurisdiction. They need cooperation from Belizean authorities, warrants, diplomatic clearances. By the time they cut through all that red tape, Edward could be gone again, I said, frustration rising. Vivian leaned forward, her voice dropping. Exactly. Which is why I'm really here. I have a private plane. I have contacts in Belize who can get us to the island without alerting Edward's people. We could be there in 12 hours, verify his presence, then alert the FBI once we have confirmation. I stared at her, stunned by the proposal. You want us to go after Edward ourselves? Without the FBI? Not to confront him, just to confirm he's there, so the FBI doesn't waste resources on a wild goose chase. Once we know he's on the island, we call in Hargrove and his team. It was madness. Reckless, dangerous madness. And yet, a part of me yearned to take action, to be more than a protected witness waiting in a safe house while Edward enjoyed his freedom. The FBI would never allow it, I said, testing her. They don't need to know until after we've verified Edward's location. Vivian's eyes gleamed with determination. Think about it, Eleanor. This could be our chance to end this, to bring Edward to justice for what he did to Richard, to Emily, to both of us. I should have refused. Should have reported the conversation to Hargrove immediately. Instead, I heard myself asking, when would we leave? Tonight. After dinner. I've been cleared to stay at the safe house until tomorrow. There's a gap in the perimeter at the north fence, a blind spot in the camera coverage. My contact will be waiting with a car. You've planned this thoroughly. I was a journalist investigating corruption and extremism for 10 years, Eleanor. Planning is what kept me alive. She reached across the table, taking my hand. I understand if you don't want to come. This isn't your fight in the same way it's mine. But I thought you deserved the choice. I thought of Richard, of Emily, of the 2 months I spent living in my car while Alexis lounged in my penthouse. I thought of Edward, free and comfortable on his private island while I remained confined to this gilded cage. I'll come, I said, the decision crystallizing in that moment. We leave tonight. The plan worked with surprising ease. After dinner, while the agents on duty were changing shifts, Vivian and I slipped through the blind spot in the perimeter, moving quickly through the darkened fields to where a car waited on a service road beyond the fence. Vivian's contact, a serious young man who introduced himself only as Miguel, drove us to a private airstrip where a sleek jet stood fueled and ready. You're sure about this? I asked Vivian as we boarded the plane. Once we're in the air, there's no turning back. I've never been more sure of anything, she replied, her eyes gleaming with purpose. It's time Edward Winters faced justice for his crimes. The flight to Belize took just under 4 hours. Miguel, who turned out to be Vivian's former research assistant, briefed us on what to expect. The island, officially called Isla del Cielo but referred to in Edward's private communications as the Haven, was approximately 3 miles off the Belizean coast, accessible only by boat or helicopter. Security was tight but discreet, armed guards posing as maintenance staff, surveillance systems disguised as wildlife cameras, a small harbor with a patrol boat. Our contact on the mainland will take us as close as possible by fishing boat, Miguel explained, showing us satellite images of the island. From there, we'll use a small inflatable to reach this cove on the eastern shore. It's a blind spot in their security coverage, or was, according to our latest intelligence. And if it's not anymore? I asked. Miguel and Vivian exchanged glances. Then we improvise, Vivian said with a confidence I didn't entirely share. We landed at a small airstrip outside Belize City, just before dawn. A battered truck was waiting, driven by a weathered local fisherman introduced as Carlos. He spoke little English but nodded respectfully when Vivian showed him a photograph and a stack of American bills. The drive to the coastal village where Carlos kept his boat took an hour on increasingly rough roads. I sat in the back, watching the tropical landscape pass by, wondering if I had made a terrible mistake. What if Edward wasn't on the island? What if this was all an elaborate trap? What if Vivian wasn't who she claimed to be? But it was too late for doubts. We had committed to this course of action, and I would see it through. Carlos's boat was a simple fishing vessel, weathered but well-maintained. He guided it skillfully through the clear blue waters, keeping a careful distance from Isla del Cielo as we approached. Through binoculars, I could make out a sprawling white mansion nestled among tropical gardens, a private dock with several boats, and what appeared to be a helipad. "There," Vivian said suddenly, pointing to a sleek yacht anchored in the island's harbor. "That's Edward's boat, the Sovereign. I recognize it from my research. He's here." My heart raced. After all this time, all the searching, Edward was within reach. Justice for Richard, for Emily, for all his victims, was finally possible. Carlos brought his boat as close to the island as he dared, dropping anchor in a small cove hidden from the main house by a rocky outcropping. The inflatable raft was quickly prepared, and soon Vivian, Miguel, and I were paddling silently toward the shore, staying low to avoid detection. "Remember the plan," Vivian whispered as we neared the beach. "We confirm Edward's presence, take photographic evidence, then retreat to Carlos's boat and call the FBI. No confrontation, no heroics." I nodded, though a part of me, the part still burning with rage over Emily's murder, wanted nothing more than to confront Edward face to face, to see the look in his eyes when he realized his niece's death had been exposed. We beached the raft in a small, secluded cove, concealing it under branches and leaves. Miguel took point, leading us through the dense tropical vegetation toward the mansion. The heat and humidity were oppressive, my city clothes quickly becoming damp with sweat as we moved cautiously through the underbrush. After 20 minutes of careful progress, we reached the edge of the manicured grounds surrounding the mansion. From our vantage point behind a thick hedge, we could see the rear terrace, a swimming pool glittering in the morning sun, and several staff members moving about the property. "Now we wait," Vivian murmured. "Edward is an early riser. Always has been. If he's here, he'll come out for breakfast on the terrace. It's his routine." And so we waited, crouched in the humid shelter of the hedge, watching the terrace with the focus of hunters stalking prey. An hour passed, then two. Staff appeared periodically, setting the table, bringing out platters of fruit and pastries, checking that everything was perfect. Just as my patience was beginning to wear thin, the glass doors to the terrace slid open. Edward Winters stepped out, dressed in casual linen pants and a light blue shirt, looking for all the world like a man on a pleasant vacation rather than a fugitive accused of multiple murders. He was followed by a young woman I recognized immediately, despite never having seen her in her true identity, Alexis Winters, Edward's daughter, the woman who had posed as Vivian Lane and made my life a living hell for 2 months. She was dressed similarly to her father, casual but expensive, her blonde hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Miguel raised his camera, its powerful zoom lens capturing clear images of father and daughter as they settled at the table, accepting coffee from a hovering staff member, completely at ease in their tropical hideaway. "We've got them," Vivian whispered, excitement in her voice. "Clear, identifiable photos. That's all we needed. Now we can go back to the boat and call Hargrove." But I couldn't move. Seeing Edward and Alexis there, comfortable and carefree while I had spent months in fear and grief, ignited something primal within me. Before I knew what I was doing, I had stood up, stepping out from behind the hedge. "Edward," I called, my voice carrying clearly across the terrace. Father and daughter froze, coffee cups halfway to their lips. Edward recovered first, setting down his cup with deliberate calm. "Eleanor," he said, his voice betraying only mild surprise. "I was wondering when you'd show up." Vivian and Miguel appeared beside me, Miguel still filming, Vivian's expression a mixture of alarm and resignation at my impulsive action. "You knew we were coming?" I asked, advancing slowly across the lawn toward the terrace. Edward smiled, the same charming political smile I'd seen in countless campaign ads. "Not specifically today. But I knew you wouldn't stay hidden for long. Not after that rather dramatic video statement." He gestured to the empty chairs at the table. "Join us for breakfast? We have much to discuss." It was so bizarre, so utterly disconnected from the reality of our situation, that I almost laughed. "Discuss? You murdered my husband. You murdered my daughter. You had me living in my car for 2 months while your daughter pretended to be your brother's mistress. What exactly is there to discuss? The future, Eleanor. Yours and mine. Edward's smile never wavered. You've made some very serious accusations. Inflammatory accusations. Without evidence. I'd like to offer you an opportunity to reconsider your position. I have evidence. I gestured to Miguel and his camera. And now I have proof that you're here, in hiding, rather than facing justice for your crimes. The FBI is on its way, Edward. It's over. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Edward's face. He glanced at Alexis, who had remained silent, her eyes cold and watchful. I doubt that very much, Edward said, recovering his composure. This island is outside FBI jurisdiction. And even if they do come, with all their warrants and legal paperwork, do you really think they'll find anything incriminating? I've had weeks to prepare, Eleanor. To sanitize my affairs, to ensure there's nothing left to connect me to any of the activities you've described. Except Richard's journal, I countered. His documentation of how you arranged for Emily's death. The experimental treatment, the specialist you recommended, Dr. Kessler. All of it documented in Richard's own handwriting. Edward's smile tightened.
Hearsay.
The desperate conspiracy theories of a grieving father. It would never stand up in court, maybe not on its own. But combined with the financial records Richard collected, the testimony of James Wilson and Margot Landry, the evidence Vivian gathered during her investigation, I took another step forward. It's enough, Edward. More than enough to destroy you, even if you never spend a day in prison. A muscle twitched in Edward's jaw, a small tell, but one I recognized from years of family gatherings. He was angry, losing control of the situation. You should have stayed in your safe house, Eleanor, he said, his voice hardening. You were protected there. Here, you're just a trespasser on private property, an intruder who could be dealt with appropriately. Alexis shifted in her seat, and I saw her hand move beneath the table. A signal? A weapon? Vivian must have seen it too. She stepped forward, positioning herself slightly in front of me. It's too late for threats, Senator. As Eleanor said, the FBI is already on the way. You can't silence all of us. Edward's laugh was cold, nothing like the warm chuckle he used at campaign events. Can't I? Do you really think anyone knows you're here? That your little unauthorized excursion from the safe house has been reported? That anyone is coming to save you? A chill ran through me as the implication of his words sank in. You knew about the safe house, about our escape.
How?
I have friends everywhere, Eleanor. In the FBI, in the Justice Department, in places you can't even imagine. Edward stood, his posture relaxed but menacing. Did you really think I wouldn't have contingency plans? Loyal people in place to alert me to exactly this kind of reckless crusade. Movement caught my eye, figures emerging from the house, from the gardens, from the paths leading to the beach. Men in casual clothes, but with the unmistakable bearing of security personnel. We were surrounded. Now, Edward continued, here's what's going to happen. Your camera and phones will be confiscated and destroyed. You will be detained here until arrangements can be made for a more permanent solution to the problem you represent. And then you will disappear, just another tragic accident in a world full of them. He gestured, and the security personnel began to close in. Miguel raised his camera higher, as if the act of documenting would somehow protect us. Vivian moved closer to me, her expression determined but fearful. It won't work, Edward, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. You can kill us, but you can't erase what we know, what we've shared with others. The truth is already out there. The truth, Edward scoffed. A malleable concept at best. Today's truth becomes tomorrow's discredited conspiracy theory. A few well-placed stories about your mental instability following Richard's death, your obsession with blaming me, your breakdown and disappearance. The narrative writes itself. He nodded to the nearest security man, who reached for Miguel's camera. Miguel resisted briefly, but a sharp blow to his stomach doubled him over, the camera falling from his hands to be caught by the guard. Stop, I cried, moving to help Miguel, but another guard blocked my path. "Secure them," Edward ordered. "Take them to the boathouse for now. I'll decide their ultimate fate later." The guards moved in, grabbing Miguel roughly, reaching for Vivian and me. I closed my eyes, waiting for the inevitable, when a new voice cut through the tension. "Federal agents.
Freeze.
Hands where we can see them." My eyes flew open. Emerging from the surrounding gardens, from behind the pool house, from every direction, came men and women in tactical gear, weapons raised, FBI vests clearly visible. Leading them was Agent Hargrove, his expression grim as he advanced on Edward. "Edward Winters, you are under arrest for the murder of Richard Winters, conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, obstruction of justice, and a host of other charges we'll detail later. Put your hands behind your head and get on your knees." Edward's face contorted with rage and disbelief. "This is impossible. This is a sovereign nation. You have no jurisdiction here." "Actually, we do," came another voice, a tall, distinguished Belizean official in a crisp uniform. "The government of Belize has granted the FBI temporary jurisdiction in this matter, given the severity of the charges and the evidence presented." Edward looked wildly around, seeking escape, but he was completely surrounded. The security personnel, seeing the overwhelming force arrayed against them, were already surrendering, dropping their weapons and raising their hands. Alexis made a sudden move, reaching beneath the table. "Gun!" someone shouted, and several agents swung their weapons toward her. But before she could retrieve whatever she was reaching for, Vivian lunged forward, tackling her to the ground, pinning her arms behind her back. "Enough, Alexis," Vivian said, her voice hard. "It's over." Agents moved in, securing Edward and Alexis with handcuffs, reading them their rights. Edward's face was a mask of hatred as he was led past me. "This isn't over, Eleanor," he hissed. "Not by a long shot." I met his gaze steadily. "Yes, Edward, it is. For Emily. For Richard. For all the lives you've destroyed. It's finally completely over." Hargrove approached me, his expression a mixture of exasperation and relief. "Mrs. Winters, I should have you arrested for interfering with a federal investigation, evading protective custody, and about a dozen other violations. But you won't," I said, suddenly certain. "Because we led you to them. Because this worked." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "We've been monitoring Vivian since she was rescued. We knew she was planning something, but we didn't know exactly what until you both left the safe house. By then, we were already coordinating with Belizean authorities, preparing for an operation here." "You used us as bait," Vivian said, joining us after Alexis had been taken away. "You let us think we were acting on our own, but you were tracking us the whole time." Hargrove had the grace to look slightly ashamed. "We needed to confirm Edward was here before committing resources to an international operation. Your unauthorized excursion provided the perfect cover. Edward's spy in our organization reported your escape exactly as we hoped, giving Edward a false sense of security." "And who is the spy?" I asked. "Agent Chen. She's been feeding Edward carefully curated information for weeks, under our direction. A double agent, working to gain his trust while actually serving our investigation." I shook my head, impressed despite myself. "So this whole thing, our escape, the flight here, all of it, was part of your plan?" "Not exactly. We hoped you'd lead us to Edward, but we expected you to contact us once you had confirmation of his location. Your direct confrontation was unexpected and extremely dangerous." Hargrove's stern expression softened slightly, but effective. "We have them both now, along with evidence of Edward's network of co-conspirators, thanks to materials seized here on the island." I looked around at the beautiful tropical paradise that had been Edward's intended sanctuary, now swarming with federal agents. Justice, long delayed, had finally arrived. 6 months later, I sat in a federal courtroom, watching as Edward and Alexis Winters were sentenced for their crimes. The trial had been swift and decisive, the evidence overwhelming. James Wilson and Margot Landry had both testified against Edward in exchange for reduced sentences. The real Vivian Lane had provided crucial testimony about Edward's financial crimes and his plot to interfere with the upcoming election. And I had told my story of Richard's murder, of my exile from my home, of the elaborate scheme to discredit me while Edward and his co-conspirators looted Richard's company. The most damning evidence, however, had come from an unexpected source. Dr. Alexander Kessler, the physician Edward had used to accelerate Emily's illness 20 years ago, had been found alive in Argentina. Suffering from terminal cancer himself, he had provided a full confession, confirming everything in Richard's journal about Emily's treatment being deliberately manipulated to ensure her death. Edward received multiple life sentences, without the possibility of parole. Alexis received 30 years for her role in the conspiracy. As they were led from the courtroom, Edward turned to look at me one last time, his eyes filled with the same cold hatred I'd seen on the island. I met his gaze calmly, feeling not triumph, but a quiet sense of completion. It was truly over. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for a statement. With Vivian Lane beside me for support, I stepped up to the microphones. "Justice has been served today," I began. "Not just for my husband, Richard, or for my daughter, Emily, but for all the victims of Edward Winter's ambition and cruelty. The truth has prevailed over lies, decency over corruption, justice over power." A reporter called out, "Mrs. Winters, what will you do now?" I smiled, thinking of the plans already taking shape. "I'm establishing the Emily Winters Foundation, dedicated to supporting ethical medical research and protecting vulnerable patients from experimental treatments that might do more harm than good. And I'm working with Vivian Lane on a book detailing this entire ordeal to ensure that the full truth is recorded for history." "And personally?" another reporter asked. "Will you return to your penthouse?" "No," I said, the decision one I'd made months ago. "Too many painful memories there. I've sold the penthouse and most of Richard's properties. I'm keeping only the lake cabin, which I'm renovating as a retreat for families affected by crimes similar to what we experienced." As the press conference ended, and I walked with Vivian toward the waiting car, I felt lighter than I had in years. The grief for Richard and Emily would never fully disappear, but it was no longer tinged with the bitter poison of unanswered questions and unpunished crimes. "Are you really okay?" Vivian asked as we settled into the car. That couldn't have been easy, seeing them sentenced, revisiting everything again. "I'm okay," I assured her, and for the first time in a long time, it wasn't a lie. I spent 2 months living in my car, believing I'd lost everything, my husband, my home, my dignity. But in losing those things, I found something I didn't know I had. "What's that?" I smiled, thinking of the journey from victimhood to victory, from despair to determination. "Strength. The kind that doesn't come from wealth or status or other people. The kind that comes from within, from surviving what you thought would destroy you." Vivian squeezed my hand. "Richard would be proud of you. Emily, too." "I know," I said softly, "and that's enough." As the car pulled away from the courthouse, I didn't look back. The past, with all its pain and betrayal, was finally behind me. Ahead lay a future I would build on my own terms, with the strength and wisdom earned through fire and loss. When my husband died, and his mistress took everything, I thought my life was over. I was wrong. It was just beginning.